Good evening, RFM.
Good evening, Bill.
How are you doing this fine night?
I'm just fine. How are you?
I'm doing great. Folks, it is Mormonism Live, December 3rd, 2025. RFM taught me that a long time ago. Give people a date so they can place it. Tonight, we're going to go into the life of Oliver Cowdery. We'll do that here in just a second, but I wanted to check in with you and see if there was anything on your mind that's going on in your life or in the Mormon world that you want to talk about.
Well, thank you. Thank you. You know, I was in Texas for a week, and I'll talk a little bit more about that maybe on Friday. Had some interesting experiences. I even had a kind of a Twilight Zone type experience, which I'll talk about on Friday. And yeah, it was really crazy, like time travel.
Ooh, well, I'm excited to hear about that. So Friday night, folks, don't miss Mormonism After Dark, 8 p.m. So we'll see you here in 2 more days. So that's the 5th of December.
So thanks for joining us tonight, and we'll see you next week on Mormonism Live.
Yeah, I wish. The folks are going to want to hang around. You and I have had a lot of fun plotting out tonight's episode. It is on Oliver Cowdery, the Book of Mormon.
I learned some stuff getting ready for this.
Yeah, me too. And so I'll put this up on the screen. Let me do that. There's the thumbnail. And this is intentional with Oliver Cowdery as an old man. I had AI take the best image that we do have of Oliver Cowdery. He appears to be in his maybe 40s, and asked ChatGPT if it would take him and age him to later point in his life. And I put a missionary copy of the Book of Mormon underneath his hand. And with that, that's our thumbnail.
That is the sadder but wiser Oliver Cowdery.
You know, when you spend a life in Mormonism, you're bound to have a little melancholy, I think. So, so here we go. This is the early life and meeting of Joseph Smith. And I'll just note here, Oliver Cowdery was born in 1806 in Vermont, the youngest of 8 children in a modest religious family. His early years were tough. His father's farming efforts were hit by crop failures. By the way, does that sound familiar? This is happening at the exact same time that Joseph Smith Sr. is having crop failures. And that's just what was happening in history at the moment, was that the United States, especially in this geographic region, was experiencing a lot of crop failures, droughts and things. And so there were a lot of people who had
a year with no summer.
Yeah. So this was similar kinds of stories. And Oliver's mother died when he was just a toddler. Relatives helped raise him, and he received a basic education. As a young man, Oliver became a school teacher. In 1828, his work took him to upstate New York, where he lodged with the family of Joseph Smith. We all know who that is, but a local farmer's son. We do have a non-Mormon audience, and so from time to time, we do want to remind folks of the details, but a local farmer's son who claimed to have a set of mystical gold plates. And while it's sometimes pointed out that Smith and Cowdery, while it is sometimes pointed out that Smith and Cowdery were related, I personally have my doubts about whether they knew each other prior to this meeting, Joseph Smith Jr. and Oliver Cowdery specifically. If we go a generation back further, I think there would be some acquaintance with family, because Cowdery was the 3rd cousin of Lucy Mack Smith, Joseph Smith's mother. And there's also a geographical connection between the Smiths and the Cowderys, and RFM will talk about that here shortly when we talk about the wood scrape. But during the 1790s, both Joseph Smith Sr. and Lucy Mack Smith and two of Cowdery's relatives were living in Tunbridge, Vermont. Now, intrigued by rumors of Joseph's plates, Oliver prayed for guidance. He later said he received a divine manifestation, as all people going into Mormonism in those early days did, that assured him that Joseph Smith's telling of the story of the plates and an angel, that it was true. And in April 1829, bold and curious, Oliver traveled to meet Joseph Smith in Harmony, Pennsylvania. The two young men, Oliver in his early 20s and Joseph a year older. That's a weird way to say it, but that's the way it had it. Oliver in his early 20s, and I don't know what that was, but if it was 1829, Joseph was born in 1805, so that would be 24. So Oliver would have been 23. Hit it off immediately. Joseph had been struggling to translate the gold plates, which would become the Book of Mormon. Again, remember, Martin Harris lost those 116 pages of manuscript, and Joseph didn't want to just simply reprint those. So Oliver offered to help as a fresh scribe. Starting on April 7th, 1829, he sat with Joseph day after day, writing down the words that Joseph dictated. Together, in a burst of intense work over about 3 months, they completed the manuscript of the Book of Mormon. Oliver even attempted to translate on his own at one point. Remember, he had the gift of the rod, but by his own admission, he failed. And RFM will be talking about a moment in time where that may have happened as well. A rebuke came by revelation telling him he hadn't understood the work required, and Oliver's skills in writing and his devout faith were invaluable to Joseph's. Not allowed to translate, but he did continue on as Joseph Smith's right-hand man. While acting as Joseph's scribe, Oliver became more than just a note-taker. He was right there during the church's most supernatural claims. In May 1829, he and Joseph prayed about baptism and, much later, claimed that John the Baptist appeared, gave them the Aaronic priesthood, and told them to baptize each other in the Susquehanna River. They also later claimed that Peter, James, and John, and this also was a later telling. Again, David Whitmer says, I don't know anything about these stories. They were not told while I was in the church. It was only years later that this version of events became part of the early Mormon narrative. But they also claimed later that Peter, James, and John showed up in a vision and gave them the higher Melchizedek priesthood. These priesthood stories became key to LDS authority claims, and Oliver was right at the center of it all. By June, the translation was done, and Oliver prepared the printer's manuscript. Before printing, Joseph organized a moment for the witnesses to see the plates. Oliver Cowdery, Martin Harris, and David Whitmer joined him in prayer, but at first nothing happened, not until Martin stepped away. Then Oliver and David reported an angel that revealed the plates to them, and hearing the voice of God affirmed the translation. Martin Harris eventually had the same experience, but separately. Oliver became one of the famous three witnesses and later signed a testimony printed in the Book of Mormon, claiming he'd been shown the gold plates in an angelic vision. That statement is still in the book today. Any thoughts on this early history, RFM?
I've got two thoughts. Okay. The first is just the observation that Peter, James, and John were mentioned in writing at least as of 1835 with the first edition of the Book of Mormon. And David Whitmer did not leave the church, I think, until he was excommunicated, probably in 1838. The second thing is this, which just hit me like a bolt out of the blue. I have heard this story how many times about the three witnesses and going to pray and all this stuff. And I've done all these podcasts about magic and Mormonism. But my Lord, if you look at that as a magic trick, right? Who is it who leaves the group?
The one who is not open to the magic.
Isn't it Martin Harris?
Yeah.
No, he's the freaking angel. He leaves the group to put on his costume and appear as the angel. He's the Confederate. If that's a magic trick, that's how it's done.
You know, you're on to something here, by the way. And all you have to do is pick a time that's a little dark. It's late. It's early in the morning. It's late in the evening. But you're right. If it's like, hey, you three are going to have a vision, and one of you goes, I can't have the vision. He walks away and
don't have the faith. I'm sorry. I'm feeling really bad about this, guys.
He comes back as the center of the magic trick. That's yeah. That is how you would do it if it was magic. Of course, Mormonism is true and not magic in the way that we think of it.
You know, it's actually kind of suspicious that one guy leaves the group before the angel appears.
Yeah. We'll get to, by the way, there's a moment later in this conversation where somebody claims that there is a record of Oliver Cowdery, who also says that when I heard the angel Moroni, it sounded a hell of a lot like Sidney Rigdon. So we'll get
right in that defense book.
Yeah, we'll get to that here shortly too. I want to turn the time over to you. You've got some information.
I think the angel sounded like Martin Harris.
Yeah, I think it did too, now that you say that.
Okay, so we're just talking about Oliver Cowdery being the amanuensis, I think, for the Book of Mormon. And there are different places where different authors or different writers are reflected, different handwriting, but mostly it's Oliver Cowdery. There is a unique place in Alma chapter 45, verse 22, what came to be that designation. In the original manuscript, which experts have identified as having been written by Joseph Smith Jr. This is the only place in the original manuscript that has Joseph Smith Jr.'s handwriting. Of course, we have to remember that there's only about 20% or so of the original manuscript that we have. So 80% is lost, and we don't know what would have been on there or if there were other examples of Joseph Smith Jr.'s handwriting. But we know we've got it here. So I only bring it up because in the context of that story that you alluded to, Bill, about Oliver Cowdery being given the opportunity to translate, and for whatever reason, he can't hack it and he has to go back to being a scribe. Well, the question does raise itself. Who was being the scribe when Oliver Cowdery was dictating, when he was translating? And if it's just the two of them, the obvious answer would be Joseph Smith.
Right.
And regardless of that, it is a strange thing that Joseph Smith's handwriting would appear anywhere on the manuscript, and one wonders what circumstances attended it.
Yeah, you made a point with me on the phone that I thought was brilliant. We have this narrative that Joseph Smith is just a country bumpkin. I think it's Emma Smith says he couldn't have dictated a letter more or less, read and write with any sort of competency. But as you pointed out, when you look at Joseph Smith's handwriting here, it ain't too shabby, is it?
He has better handwriting at this young age than I have ever had in my entire life. It's actually a very elegant hand.
Yeah, I think that's a big deal because it displaces the narrative that Joseph Smith couldn't possibly dictate or write. By the way, dictation is just storytelling, which to me seems like it would be an easier mode of giving out information than having to write things down. But Joseph's got scribes to do the writing. But if Joseph is called to write, Emma reported him as being not good at it. Here, he seems to be very good at it.
It looks beautiful.
Yeah.
And anyway, what I wanted to say about this is simply that is apparently his handwriting. And I've known about this for a long time. Now, the good people at FAIR and maybe other experts, maybe even Dan Vogel, would say that the place where this appears in the Book of Mormon translation doesn't line up with the Revelations and Doctrine and Covenants 8 and 9 and all that stuff. I don't know if that's the case. But if this isn't where it happened, I wonder why Joseph Smith is writing there.
Yeah, I think something else I want to say here too, RFM, which is the faithful narrative about this is that Oliver attempted to translate, and we'd like to figure out exactly where is the spot in the Book of Mormon where he's actually doing translating. And my hunch is that something very different happened, which is Oliver's begging to take part. He wants to translate. Joseph says, "Oh, sure. Yeah, go for it, kid." And Oliver, puts his head in the hat or holds his divining rod or however he does.
Oliver says, "Help me get this rod in the hat."
Yeah.
Because it's not fitting.
And what he ends up coming back with is, I'm not getting anything. And Joseph says, "Of course you're not. You're nincompoop. This is my job." And then Joseph takes his hat back, takes his rock back, and continues the process. There isn't any place in the Book of Mormon where Oliver Cowdery was actually doing any translating because there wasn't any real translating to be done.
And if he had, then wouldn't he have been succeeding in some sense? And why not then continue?
Yeah.
However, I've got to tell you, when you look up this Alma 4522 in the Book of Mormon, it really is not, I don't know. It's not a game changer of a verse. So you've got, it's 45. So it's in the war chapters, right? In verse 21, leading up to verse 22. For behold, because of their wars with the Lamanites and the many little dissensions and disturbances which had been among the people, it became expedient that the word of God should be declared among them, yea, and that a regulation should be made throughout the church. Okay, Joseph says, hand me that pen. Therefore, Helaman and his brethren went forth to establish the church again in all the land, yea, in every city throughout all the land which was possessed by the people of Nephi. And it came to pass that they did appoint priests and teachers throughout all the land over all the churches. Now, not every word in that was in Joseph Smith's hand. That last line may not have been in his hand, but it occurs within the context of what is now Alma 4522. I mean, it's not really, did you feel the spirit when I read that? Was that engaging to you, uplifting, enlightening, anything?
I did have a revelation, which is I think that that part, verse 22 at the beginning up until just before the last sentence of verse 22.
Yes.
I think that's the amount of time it takes Oliver Cowdery to go outside and take a piss. That's how long it takes Joseph Smith to write.
Well, it's an interesting thing. And by the way, I tried to do a little bit more of a close-up here. Someone else had highlighted this, and you can almost see it now that you know what it says. Yea, in every city throughout, that's the top part, and possessed by the something, blah, 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 and priests and teachers. So priests and teachers apparently was in Joseph Smith's hand as well, up to that point. Okay. The wood scrape. You know, I always thought this wood scrape sounded painful. It's like when you fall with your elbows first into this big pile of kindling wood, and it says, ow, I got a scrape. No, that's not actually what it is. Wood was a person's name.
By the way, scrape here is used in the same way, similar way as Oliver Cowdery uses it with his brother Warren when he says the filthy, nasty scrape.
Yes.
You could call this the wood affair.
Right. A scrape is like a kerfuffle, a flap, right? A scrape. Yeah. You're in a bad spot. The New Israelites. This is a group. This is a religious group. Right before Oliver and Joseph were born. The New Israelites were a radical sect founded by Nathaniel Wood, hence the wood scrape, in Vermont in the 1790s. Wood declared his followers modern Israelites, and the group practiced a strict dietary code as they understood to be instructed in the law of Moses. Okay, a dietary code. Like most radical sects, the group displayed spiritual gifts like the Mormons used to. A lot of people did, still today. And made prophecies. Okay. At one point, the group began building a temple. What? Although the project was eventually abandoned. Nathaniel Wood formed the New Israelites in Middletown, Rutland County, Vermont at the end of the 1790s. Originally a Congregationalist, Wood was excommunicated in 1789, after which he began to preach to small meetings whose attendees were mostly family and relatives. The sect may have been influenced by the Nuant separates of Norwich and the Knights who say knee. The Nuant separates of Norwich, who believed in perfectionist immortalism and spiritual wifery. Oh, that's interesting. And the preaching of Reverend Joel Benedict, who taught that Hebrew was the angelic tongue. Hebrew, angelic tongue, Adamic language. By the way, everybody, I tried to find some information about this, and I would either find it from pro-Mormon sites, which tried to hide or discount the similarities, versus more critical sites that really wanted to lay on the similarities. This is just taken from the Wikipedia article. Okay, I figured that would probably be striking, hopefully more of a middle ground. It didn't seem to have as big of a an axe to grind. Could you read this slide, Bill?
The sect claimed literal descent from the 10 lost tribes of Israel. That seems familiar too. And they practiced divination. Joseph Smith, the treasure digger. Another similarity. After the sect was joined by a counterfeiter and treasure seer named Winchell, probably Justice Winchell, in the spring or early summer of 1800.
Inventor of the donut, Justice Winchell.
Yeah, and treasure seer. This is interesting too. The New Israelites, by the way, that reminds me of New Jerusalem, which Joseph Smith uses in places. The New Israelites began dowsing to look for buried treasure in Middleton and Rutland, Vermont. I want to jump in and be sarcastic here because I know we get to it, but I want to say, what does this have to do with Oliver Cowdery and the family and Joseph Smith? But of course, we'll see that here in just a second. They also embarked on the construction of a temple, which you noted, another similarity. The group employed the divining rod for both treasure hunting and other forms of revelation. It was suspected that these efforts masked a counterfeiting operation. There was some counterfeiting operations like those Kirtland Safety Society notes, sort of, and other things. I think somebody wrote a book in Mormonism on the multiple aspects of counterfeiting within Mormonism. I remember that one year at Sunstone. It was suspected that these efforts masked a counterfeiting operation. Wood predicted the arrival of a destroying angel. There's a term used in Mormonism on the 14th of January, 1802, that would bring down plagues and earthquakes upon the Gentiles. Sounds like Third Nephi.
Yeah, it does. And the last days. I think that's in the church's name somewhere, isn't it? That big long name that we have to use now.
It is.
Or maybe don't anymore. The Latter-day Saints. On January 14th, 1802, D-Day, the day that Wood said would be the commencement of the apocalypse, as the sect gathered together to await the arrival of the destroying angel. It's like that scene in Independence Day where they're dancing around on the top of that tower in Los Angeles. The locals were so alarmed that on the night in question, the militia was called out. The militia then fired their weapons to disperse this fraternity of rodsmen. This event was subsequently known as the Wood Scrape. After the Wood Scrape, Wood and his family split town and moved to Ellisburg, New York, and the sect became extinct. That's what should happen to a sect when it predicts the apocalypse is going to start on this day, and then that day comes and it doesn't happen. They should become extinct.
That is what should happen to them. It doesn't happen with all of them, though.
No, it seems to be quite the reverse. All right. Did you want to try this slide?
I sure can. I just wanted to note, though, there are so many similarities between these folks. And again, the earlier parts of Cowdery's family were involved with these folks. Witnesses from Vermont connected William Cowdery to the sect. Before these witnesses could have known that his son Oliver was a dowser. When you get these terms like New Israelites and Hebrew was an angelic tongue, you've got the spiritual wifery, they're building temples. It strikes me that if we were to find these New Israelites in the Dead Sea Scrolls, it would be touted by apologists as a significant evidence that the church is true. And I only point that out because it's something we easily dismiss when we're attacking this as a criticism. But when it's a faithful perspective, it would have stood as evidence much stronger than NHM, for instance.
This is a great point, and it took me a while to register it. What I think you're saying is that if they had these kinds of teachings that are taught by the New Israelites prior to Mormonism, but if they had found in ancient scrolls in the Dead Sea or somewhere, had found these same teachings there, that would have been touted by apologists as evidence for Mormonism, whereas the fact that it seems to have occurred in a small group, that Joseph Smith Sr. and Oliver Cowdery's dad may have been associated with and certainly knew about. I can't imagine that everybody in the entire neighborhood of hundreds of miles didn't know about this thing going on, and either before or after or both. So these things are, I think, very, very significant, and the similarities are very important, but an apologist, because they occur in this context, will not touch them with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah, I'm saying also that these may be a coincidence. I'm not over here going, oh my goodness. Right. I think the Smiths and the Cowderys took all of Joseph's theology, came originally from this group, or lots of it did. I'm saying, isn't it interesting how apologists deal with evidence, and which evidence gets significant weight and which evidence is dismissed as, oh, that's just silly. And when you just switch which side it testifies of, it's really easy to see that they would see a difference in strength. And all that does is it speaks to how an apologist mind works. If it works for you, it's strong. It's strong. If it works against you, your brain comes up with ways to dismiss it. And I think you'll see something very different tonight as we get through this evidence. There are places where I saw really interesting things, and I decided to keep looking because my internal radar told me even though this was working towards my desired conclusion, I was getting feelings like, no, I don't believe this, in spite of the fact that this would work in my favor. And so I kept looking, and eventually I found credible evidence that allowed me to dismiss the thing that would have helped the conclusion I sort of wish would come at the end, right? Which is, we have some smoking gun moment where Oliver Cowdery is not a credible witness for the Book of Mormon. And that didn't happen. And apologist versus critics who are dealing with things using a reasonable, rational, critical mind, those are two very different games being played.
Well said.
Okay. All right, so here it is. Members of the New Israelites may have included Joseph Smith Sr., the father of Joseph Smith Jr., and William Cowdery, father of Book of Mormon witness Oliver Cowdery.
Can I stop you there for just a second, just to underscore the may in that sentence?
Yep.
It's put there intentionally.
Yep.
And should be highlighted. May. Okay.
Yeah, and that's my point, is that I don't believe this is strong evidence. I don't have any sort of significant belief that they were a part of this and that this impacted Mormonism. I think there's other arguments to be made about these kinds of ideas being in the milieu of this of the United States, specifically this geographic region, and that it influenced the Smiths more generally.
They're at ground zero.
Yeah. But we think it's important to share, because there's also, we can't exclude that this is true. There is evidence that this is true. And it's sort of in the realm of maybe, maybe not. And hence the audience deserves to know the information. Okay.
Oliver Cowdery's dad could have practiced with the rod independent of this group.
And probably did. He probably played with the rod a lot. But the best case exists for connecting the Cowdery family, as they are known to have lived near the woods, not the forest woods, but the wood scrape woods. They lived near the woods in the early 19th century, later attended a Congregationalist church in Pulteney, Vermont. After the wood scrape, Oliver Cowdery, who was not born at the time of the wood scrape, was later known as a dowser and was the second highest ranking early leader of the Latter-day Saint movement, next to Joseph Smith Jr.
So it could be just a small constellation of coincidences, but it is interesting.
It is.
Oh, sorry.
No, you got it.
Okay. Vermont residents who were interviewed by a local historian said that Joseph Smith Sr. was also part of the New Israelites and was one of its leading rodsmen. However, there is no historical consensus linking Smith to the New Israelites because of the difficulty in placing Joseph Smith Sr. in Rutland County, Vermont during that time period. In other words, you got people who were saying it, and there's no evidence to support that he was even there. Although residents said that he lived in Pulteney, Vermont at the time of the wood movement here, there are no other records placing Smith closer than about 50 miles away. On the other hand, Smith's involvement with the New Israelites would be consistent with his links to Congregationalism and his reported admission in 1837 that he entered the money-digging business more than 30 years ago.
And I'll just note, RFM, Dan Vogel is chiming in and agreeing essentially with what you've got here, which is, yes, there's this one little tidbit that seems to link Smith with this group, but he does live some distance away, and there really isn't any other good evidence of that. Vogel now notes that William Cowdery lived in the area of the wood scrape, but that Joseph Sr. did not. So there's another acknowledgement that it's hard to place Smith directly in this geographic area.
Right. Okay, now let's see. I think that's the end of that part. No. There was this part too, because it's in section 8 of the Doctrine and Covenants, verses 6 and 7, where it talks about Oliver's gift of Aaron. And this is how I had read it in my Doctrine and Covenants after I got baptized. Now, this is not all thy gift. God speaking to Oliver Cowdery through Joseph Smith. For you have another gift, which is the gift of Aaron. Behold, it has told you many things. Behold, there is no other power save the power of God that can cause this gift of Aaron to be with you. Therefore, doubt not, for it is the gift of God, and you shall hold it in your hands and do marvelous works. Now, the thing is that in every, like the Institute manual that went along with the Doctrine and Covenants and church history, those huge, massive things, those paperbacks, you dropped them, you could hurt yourself. I read through that. I read through all of them with all the standard works after I got back from my mission, but I remember that in every other commentary that I could find on the Doctrine and Covenants describe this gift of Aaron in some kind of spiritual term. All right. There was nothing physical about it. It was this gift of Aaron, this ephemeral thing. The problem is that when I kept going back to the verse, it kept saying, "You shall hold it in your hand." And I could not understand how that made any sense with something that was intangible. And then I began hearing something else, that it was actually a rod. And of course, the story of the rod of Aaron in the Old Testament or the Hebrew scriptures. And I remember going down to the Institute building in Austin, not long after I got back from my mission, maybe within a year or two. They had a library, they had a book in there, and I think it's called Joseph Smith Begins His Work, and it might have been volume 2. And there they had a reprint of the Book of Commandments. And I knew what I was looking for, and I opened it up to the Book of Commandments, 7:3, section 7, chapter 7, verse 3, to read what it had originally been on that revelation in the Doctrine and Covenants. And this is what it says. God speaking to Oliver Cowdery via Joseph Smith, "Remember, this is your gift. Now, this is not all, for you have another gift, which is the gift of working with the rod." They took that out between 1833 and 1835, so we wouldn't know what it was, which is the gift of working with the rod. "Behold, it has told you things." This is a speaking rod in some way, a communicating rod. "Behold, there is no other power save God that can cause this rod of nature," there it is again, "to work in your hands, for it is the work of God." Now, that was kind of shocking to me. At one and the same time, it suddenly made the verse in the Doctrine and Covenants make sense, because now it made sense why he could hold it in his hands. But it was also quite shocking to me to find out what it was originally, and perhaps most disturbing of all, that it had been changed without telling me.
Yeah, somebody did. I remember seeing this image years ago, but this is a rendition of Oliver Cowdery holding a divining rod in his hand. And I'll just say this too. I know exactly what you're talking about, the Institute Manual for Church History, the Fullness of Times. It's got the cover of like the Sacred Grove or something on the front. It's like wood. It's like a woods or something. It's trees. But anyway, it's super thick. It's maybe 1.5 inches thick or so. And it strikes me now, and I've had this thought in the last few years, but I've got the manual on my bookshelf. You would read that today. It's a college level telling of church history. You would spend an entire semester studying history of the church in college, and this is the curriculum. And if folks were to look at that today, you would go, church isn't telling anybody anything in that book. That is pretty much Gordon B. Hinckley's Truth Restored, expanded a little bit. It's all simplified stuff. It strikes me that in the churches, college, universities, church history curriculum, you would have never, and probably still don't today, but you would have never at that time gotten as much information in an entire semester, for instance, that we would just do tonight simply about Oliver Cowdery. But this is an image rendition of Oliver Cowdery holding that divining rod. I thought that might be interesting for people to see.
Maybe it talks like that magic flute. Do you remember the magic flute Saturday morning?
Is it like the Pied Piper's flute? Does everybody follow along?
I think it was H.R. Puffin stuff, wasn't it?
Yeah, I never watched H.R. Puffin stuff. I know who you're talking about. I had an employer actually, who it was one of his favorite shows growing up.
Oh, really?
Yeah, H.R.
You
Puffin.
hired him anyway.
He hired me, but yes.
Oh, okay. Never mind. Sorry. That's not Chris, is it?
No. This was back in Ohio at the floor covering store.
Okay. I'm just looking up H.R. Puffin stuff. You go on.
All right. So You've got here Oliver Cowdery appears in Mormon history as an intelligent and curious individual, school teacher, who is nevertheless influenced by his folk magic his folk magic upbringing to believe obtaining information from working with a rod was completely acceptable and something he was able to do himself.
Yeah, that was my conclusion after looking at this material. That was just sort of a thumbnail that made sense to me. By the way, it's Freddie the Flute. And yes, it was H.R. Puffin stuff. So I think that's how the rod would communicate.
Yeah, Dan's saying the rod would say yes or no answers.
Mm.
It would shake its head up and down, or it would just go left to right and answer questions. So there you go.
I feel like it would be a lot of fun at a party.
Yeah, sort of like a Ouija board.
Let's see. So what is the next slide? Oh, View of the Hebrews. There's a Cowdery connection there too. View of the Hebrews is an 1823 book. That was the first edition, written by Ethan Smith, a Congregationalist minister in Vermont who argued that Native Americans were descended from the 10 lost tribes of Israel. A relatively common view during the early 19th century. Now, I'm glad that's in there because we'll refer to it in a second. Numerous commentators on Mormon history from LDS Church General Authority B.H. Freaking Roberts, yes, Tufan M. Brody, biographer of Joseph Smith, have noted similarities in the content of View of the Hebrews and the Book of Mormon, which was first published in 1837, years after Ethan Smith's book. This one over here, this picture says 1825 because that was the second edition. Can you take this slide, Bill?
The Book of Mormon shares some thematic elements with View of the Hebrews. Both books quote extensively from the Old Testament prophecies of the book of Isaiah. I will note, if I'm not mistaken, there is only one chapter of crossover between Ethan Smith's View of the Hebrews and the Book of Mormon in the use of Isaiah. In other words, they both quote Isaiah a bunch. Strangely, they only overlap on one chapter, if I'm not mistaken. Again, I don't believe the Book of Mormon came from View of the Hebrews. I will note that when two authors quote extensively from Isaiah, the fact that they both only use one chapter, both of them, that's overlapping, that also seems like a strange coincidence.
And at a minimum, we could probably conclude that Isaiah had a special prominence in the community.
Yes, I think that would be a safe bet. But lest I digress. Okay, so describe the future gathering of Israel. So this is View of the Hebrews and the Book of Mormon. Describe the future gathering of Israel, the restoration of the 10 lost tribes, propose the peopling of the new world from the old. View of the Hebrews is via a land bridge, Book of Mormon via an ocean voyage. They both declare a religious motive for the migration. They both divide the migrants into civilized and uncivilized groups, such as the Lamanites and Nephites, with long wars between them and eventual destruction of the civilized, by the uncivilized. They both assume that the Native Americans were descended from Israelites and their languages came from Hebrew, and include a change of government from monarchy to republic, and they both suggest that the gospel was preached in ancient America.
Now, there are these similarities. It's rather a long slog of a book, but there's a whole lot of differences too. And I think it's much easier to believe. I don't think you have to prove that, Oliver Cowdery smuggled a copy of this book to Joseph Smith by night. These ideas were common and people knew about them. These were the arguments that were going on. People on different sides of the issue. Not everybody thought that the Native Americans here were from, they were Hebrew. Some thought they might have come from other countries, right? And so there were discussions going on about these issues. It was in the air. Joseph Smith didn't have to read the book to get the ideas. The ideas are in the book because they were in the culture.
Yeah, I'll just say too, there's a book out there. I've got it on my shelf. I don't know offhand what the title is. I know it's brown. It is a book written to tell the reader about all of the cultural use of Native Americans being ancient, being descendants of ancient Hebrews, And I'll just note that lots of times in the newspapers of the day in the United States, and specifically in this region, you couldn't go a month without reading some article in the paper that was describing these kinds of ideas in regards to the Native Americans being ancient Hebrews, descended from the old world, and all the other ideas that came along with that.
Tommy right was going to take a drink. There's no alcohol in this, by the way.
Well, good on you. That's one day on the wagon.
Yes, one day at a time. All right, so where were we again? Friday's coming. When in 1922, continuing this whole idea, when in 1922, Mormon apologist B.H. Roberts was asked by church leaders to compare View of the Hebrews and the Book of Mormon, he produced a confidential report, later published as Studies of the Book of Mormon, which, by the way, was very much over the church's strenuous objections, and they did everything they could to prevent that from seeing the light of day, which it didn't until the 1980s. I was living through that. That noted 18 points of similarity. That's from B.H. Roberts. Oliver Cowdery, I put this up because I did a show on it, View of the Hebrews. Oliver Cowdery, who later served as Joseph Smith's scribe for the Book of Mormon, lived in the same small Vermont town as Ethan Smith and may have attended the Congregational Church where the latter was pastor for 5 years. Cowdery may have passed on knowledge of the book to Joseph Smith, though a passing on of the book itself would have been superfluous given how common the ideas in the book were in the community at the time. Note, the 1823 first edition was popular enough to have a second edition printed in 1825. All right, suggests a welcome reception from the reading audience.
Just a note, too, who was it? Ethan Smith had a run-in with someone else tied to Mormonism, and there's also a connection to Dartmouth, which, if folks are interested, they can go back and listen to our conversation with Randy Bell, the first one.
He was a student there.
Yeah.
But Randy would know this backward and forward, and caught flat-footed. I'm not sure I know it well enough to go any further.
Yeah, I know there's some other connection that Ethan Smith has with other facets of Mormonism that are sort of like, it's odd that there's so many run-ins, but Dartmouth being one of them. Anyway.
I do think Ethan Smith was a student there, though obviously well before Hiram Smith would have been there.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. The founder of Mormonism. Do you want to take it away, Bill?
Yeah. So, founder of Mormonism. We often think of Joseph Smith as the founder of Mormonism, but when you get into the details, that's actually not true. Oliver Cowdery is also one of the founders of Mormonism. After the Book of Mormon appeared in 1830, Joseph Smith formally organized the Church of Christ on April 6th, with Oliver Cowdery at his side as the second elder. In practice, Oliver functioned like a vice president of the new government. Educated and articulate, he preached the first public sermon after the church's founding and quickly became Joseph's main scribe, editor, and collaborator. He drafted the early Articles of the Church of Christ in 1829, which outlined basic beliefs, though Joseph later replaced it with the revelation now known as D&C, Doctrine and Covenants, Section 20. Oliver accepted the revision, but his draft shows he was trying to shape the church from the outset. We've spoken before about how Sidney Rigdon had influence on Joseph Smith's theology. We also ought to acknowledge that Oliver Cowdery had influence on early Mormon theology. Oliver also helped craft the church's early history. In 1834, 1835, he wrote newspaper letters describing Joseph's early visions. By the way, starting with Moroni's visitation and the discovery of the plates, his omission of the first vision, now central to LDS identity, has long raised questions among historians and illustrates how fluid the church's origin story still was. I think it was Stan Larson who argued that, unlike Jonah Barnes, who said that the Adam God doctrine didn't show up until the 1940s, Stan Larson's actually, I think, accurate in saying the first vision wasn't taught officially by the church's emissaries, the missionaries, until the 1940s. So there's that. His omission of the first vision, now central to LDS identity, is long race questions. We said that. Within months of the church's founding, Oliver led the Lamanite mission to the western frontier. This was what led to the conversion of Sidney Rigdon and hundreds of his followers in Ohio. That success shifted Mormonism's center to Kirtland and set the stage for further expansion into Missouri, where Oliver helped dedicate the proposed Zion Temple site. By the mid-1830s, Oliver stood at Joseph's right hand in nearly every major development. Again, think about it. John the Baptist, Peter, James, and John, the translation of the Book of Mormon, the founding of the church, the visitation of Elijah and Elias in the Kirtland Temple, Moses, and others. So quite interesting that all of this occurs with Oliver Cowdery right next to Joseph, involved in almost every facet. Please.
Elijah and Elias separate again for the first time.
Separate again for the first time. You got it. He became assistant president of the church, served on the Kirtland High Council, helped select and ordain the original quorum of the 12 apostles. His most dramatic spiritual moment came in the Kirtland Temple in 1836, when Joseph and Oliver claimed visions from Christ, Moses, Elias, and Elijah, who happened to be the same guy, but Mormonism obviously needs to have them be different, so apologists will tell you that they are different, but that doesn't make it so. These experiences made Oliver, by the way, different. They're different in the same way that Brigham Young thought Adam and Heavenly Father were different.
I think this is the same trick that Martin Harris pulled. Martin Harris disappears and then comes out as the angel. Elijah disappears, and who should show up but Elias?
It's like Scooby-Doo, if you just took off Elias's mask, it's just Elijah underneath there. These experiences made Oliver a central witness, witness to the supernatural foundations of early Mormonism and one of the movement's most influential early leaders. All right, so this next section is Oliver bumping into Joseph Smith, having issues with his exit from the church, and from the grace, Joseph Smith's grace, that is. So, would you mind reading this one?
By the late 1830s, Oliver Cowdery's once solid relationship with Joseph Smith was falling apart. The first cracks came over money in connection to the Kirtland Safety Society scandal in 1837, a church-backed bank aimed at helping the saints financially. Oliver got involved, even helping acquire printing plates for currency, but the bank failed quickly, sparking a financial crisis. Oliver, who lost money himself, left Kirtland a short time later, apparently feeling that mixing church and business had been a huge mistake. His 1838 resignation letter, written to the Missouri High Council before his excommunication, includes a subtle jab about keeping religious matters separate from civil ones. He says, quote, "I am still a lover of the truth, but I do not believe it just to mingle religious influence with civil government." While he's talking about church power generally, many historians see this as a veiled reference to Joseph's blending of religious authority with financial or political control. Then came the breaking point. Rumors in Kirtland that Joseph had secretly taken Fanny Alger, a teenage housemaid, as a lover or possibly as a plural wife.
And I want to note, by the way, most historians would suggest that she actually wasn't teenage. She was an adult, somewhere maybe in the range of 18 or 19 years old.
Okay, so she was a teenager.
Well, I guess if
you mean a minor?
Yes. If you're going to say like 18, we're parsing words here, but if you're going to say 18 teenager, sure, by the definition of the word, certainly. But I want to note that a lot of folks in the critical side in the past would argue that this would have happened around 1834, maybe 1835. She would have been 16 or 17 years old. But Don Bradley, being, I think, a great credible scholar on the inside of the church, faithful side, along with a lot of other scholars, I think the majority of scholars today would argue that this is sometime around 1837 and places her as not a teenage child, but rather 18 or older.
Okay. All right. So, but that is correct, right? Had secretly taken Fanny Alger, a teenage housemaid, as a lover or possibly as a plural wife. Although I think a lot of times the plural wife gets retrofitted in later accounts. But who knows at this point? Plural marriage wasn't public doctrine yet, and Oliver called it out as a dirty, nasty, filthy scrape affair. Joseph was furious. Whether Joseph saw it as a God-approved union or not, Oliver saw betrayal, both moral and personal. Trust shattered.
Yeah, so you've got the quote from Oliver Cowdery about the filthy, nasty, dirty, nasty scrape down there in the bottom right. This was in a letter from him to his brother Warren Cowdery. Top right there, you've got a Kirtland Safety Society note. And then I'll just note here on this next one, on the right-hand side, this is Joseph Smith Papers Project. It's in a long letter or document that is writing down the details of the disciplinary council for not only Oliver Cowdery, but for others. But there's a large section of that document that is dedicated to the interaction with Oliver Cowdery. This is the section from them naming the charges of what they're claiming Oliver did wrong, which would justify excommunication. And so in 1838, after moving to far west Missouri, Oliver faced formal church charges, meddling in legal work, selling church land for profit, criticizing leaders, accusing Joseph of adultery.
By the way, I think it was a really hot button point for Oliver too. When it says selling church lands for profit, I think what that means is that he was selling his property that he had in Missouri that Joseph had forbidden the saints to sell because the return was going to happen by the promise of God. They would return to Missouri eventually. And Oliver didn't see it that way, so he sold his land. I think that's what that's referring to. But that's how the charge is framed by the High Council.
By the way, Dan's correcting. So Fanny Alger, instead of 1837, 1836.
Well, that's what Dan Vogel says.
Yeah, and I still think that places Fanny as 18 years old, if I'm not mistaken. All right, I do want to note too. We'll read a few of these charges, and we say it later. But Oliver is reinstated post death after he's died. He is reinstated in the church, and one of the reasons the church gives for reinstating him is that the process by which the disciplinary council was held didn't follow all the procedures that it was supposed to. And so we'll get to this here in just a second. But
when you say posthumously, I mean, he was baptized, right? Rebaptized?
Yeah, but I think on some level, the churches who gave a permission for that to take place, it wasn't just a normal sort of rebaptism.
Right. You have a slide on that later.
Somewhere it was written down that the church did so with the reasoning that he wasn't excommunicated properly. If that makes sense. It notes here, by the way, too, it says that Oliver refused to show up for his hearing. That's kind of true. He refused to show up when they told him he had other things going on. He told them if they were willing to wait, that he would show up at a later time. They weren't willing to wait. So that's when he decided he would send his resignation letter. And in it, he says, I wish you guys would wait for me to show up. But since you're not going to wait, you can hereby consider me essentially resigned. It's not.
And I think that letter ended up being one of the charges against him.
Yeah, they end up this letter, the I know the letter existed was because when I read the Joseph Smith papers about the charges, immediately after that section, they put the letter into the document. By the way, I want to thank you, Dan Vogel. Your book 2 of Mormon documents was really helpful for parts of this episode. But at the end of them naming the charges, they then said, here's Oliver Cowdery's letter. We'll put this in for the record.
And number 6 becomes for writing and sending an insulting letter to President Thomas B. Marsh while on the High Council.
Yeah. So Oliver, it says, refused to show up for the hearing and instead resigned in a letter standing by his concerns. On April 12th, 1838, the church excommunicated him along with his friend David Whitmer. They're excommunicated together. 2 of the 3 witnesses exiting the church on the same day. because the church will no longer have these men whose testimonies stand at the front of the Book of Mormon. Soon after, Oliver and other dissenters were forced to flee far west under threat from the Danites, a secret group of Mormon enforcers who warned them to leave or face a more fatal calamity. As he exited, Oliver's reputation took a hit. Church leaders accused him of everything from fraud to adultery, likely more to discredit him than report facts. After all, it was dangerous for the movement to have a high-profile witness, actually two of them, like Oliver and David, walk away. Some compared him to Peter denying Christ. Joseph even called him, quote, too mean to mention, unquote. Well, sticks and stones will break your bones, but words will never hurt you. But Oliver didn't fight back publicly. He left quietly, wounded, but still apparently believing in the Book of Mormon, even if he lost his faith in the church's direction. So charges for stirring up the enemy to persecute the brethren by urging vexatious lawsuits and distressing the innocent. By the way, if that's in relation to the Kirtland Safety Society, think about that. Joseph and others had screwed people over, and they had acted inappropriately with the Kirtland Safety Society Bank. Hence, the more ethical thing to do was to try to help people get their money back. Number two. Yeah, number two, for seeking to destroy the character of President Joseph Smith by falsely insinuating he was guilty of adultery. Now, long after the fact, you might want to fight over whether Fanny Elger was a wife or not, but it doesn't seem like anybody of that day wants to talk about her being a wife. It seems like they wanted to keep that a secret, and it seems like Oliver Cowdery was just telling the truth. Number three, for treating the church with contempt by not attending meetings. Well, listen to that, all you less actives. You better get your butts back in the pews.
People did get excommunicated back in the day for not attending meetings.
Yeah, you think today's church is harsh. Ooh, you should have seen it in 1830. All right. Number four, for virtually denying the faith by declaring he would not be governed by any ecclesiastical authority nor revelation whatever in his temporal affairs. In his temporal affairs, not spiritual ones. You know, God says, don't buy a house. Well, I bought a house. Shame on you.
You know, that's interesting that in the Revelations, which is occurring to me right now, God makes a point of saying there is nothing that is temporal to him because all commands are spiritual. So in other words, King's X and the God of Mormonism can tell you what to do with everything that you own.
Yeah, you covenant to give all that you have, your time, talents, everything, to the building up of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Now bow your head and say yes. Yeah. Number five, by the way, you got this right, for selling his lands in Jackson County, contrary to the revelations. Well, that sounds a lot like the same as number four. Seems like they just wanted to say number four twice. And really, what's that?
It could be a separate count. I don't know, really.
So we got number six, for sending an insulting letter to President Thomas Marsh. Well,
that must have been one hell of a letter.
I've been insulted by a lot of things that church leaders have written. So number seven, for leaving the calling in which God had appointed him by revelation for the sake of filthy lucre and turning to the practice of law.
Ouch. You. That one stings.
That got personal, didn't it?
Oh, yeah. Everybody hates lawyers until they need one.
Yeah. Number eight, for disgracing the church by lying. No, we don't want to say that. He didn't lie. For disgracing the church by being connected in the bogus business as common.
As common report says, as rumor has it. That's what that means. As rumor we're going to charge him and put his membership in jeopardy based upon what we acknowledge as a rumor of his being involved in the counterfeit industry.
And number nine, for dishonestly retaining notes after they had been paid, and finally for leaving and forsaking the cause of God, which again, he was already told that he was in trouble for walking away from the calling, and betaking himself to the beggarly elements of the world, neglecting his high and holy calling contrary to his profession. So again, it's the same thing as I think number 7. Okay, so there's that.
And he retained notes after they had been paid. You read that part, didn't you?
Yeah.
But that, of course, he's got a promissory note, an IOU. And so he's saying that he got paid for it, but he retained the note anyway, instead of giving it to the other person, which a decent person would do, so it could be destroyed upon the discharge of the debt. The other way of looking at that is he retained a note that actually wasn't paid off, but the debtor claimed he had, but hadn't.
And in light of all that was going on with the Kirtland Safety Society and land transactions in Kirtland at the time, could you blame him? Even if he kept it just in case stuff went sideways. Okay, next one here is this attempt to this is what Oliver said in his resignation letter. The letter is bigger than this. This is just a section, but I thought this was the most important part. Oliver said, "This attempt to control me in my temporal interest, I conceived to be a disposition to take from me a portion of my constitutional privileges and inherent rights." And he would not be wrong, by the way. "I only respectfully ask leave, therefore, to withdraw from a society, assuming they have such right." He says, so far as relates to the other 7 charges, by the way, I think there were 9 charges.
But they added at least one upon receipt of this letter.
Yeah. You're right. Correct. And some of them they said twice. So maybe he's like, that's not 9. There's 8 without my letter and 6 if you count the fact that you're repeating yourself. But it says, so far as relates to the other 7 charges, I shall lay them carefully away and take such a course with regard to them as I may feel bound by my honor to answer to my rising posterity.
Ooh, this is so insulting.
I beg you, sir, to take no view of the foregoing remarks other than my belief on the outward government of this church. I do not charge you or any other person who differs with me on those points of not being sincere, but such difference does exist, which I sincerely regret. With considerations of the highest respect, I am your obedient servant, O Cowdery. And again, it just shows there, this is a website was just going through and noting the charges, and even they took the 9 charges and whittled them down really to just 6. So there's that.
Zounds, what a cad to write such a thing.
Don't you think his writing that resignation letter, and specifically this section, doesn't it sort of say, why bother disagreeing with you? I'm just going to move on with my life. You do you, I'll do me. Peace,
Yeah. Don't tell me what to do with my stuff.
Yeah. All right. Life outside of Mormonism. Would you mind taking this one, RFM?
After being excommunicado in 1838, Oliver Cowdery started over. At just 32, he moved with his wife Elizabeth Whitmer to northern Ohio, far from the chaos of Missouri. There, he studied law and became a licensed attorney by 1840 in Tiffin, Ohio, Tiffin. He set up a law practice, earned a solid reputation, and even served briefly as a justice of the peace. He got involved in politics as a Democrat and co-edited a local newspaper. In this new life, his past as a prominent Mormon was mostly unknown. He was simply Oliver Cowdery, a smart, civic-minded lawyer. Interestingly, Oliver joined the Methodist Protestant Church in Tiffin around 1842. He missed having a church community and respected the Methodists in town. Some accounts from decades later say he admitted his past Mormon beliefs were a mistake and publicly asked forgiveness when he joined. Now, decades later, mind you. He served actively in the congregation as clerk and Sunday school teacher. While we don't have a first-hand record of him renouncing Mormonism, church records confirm he was a Methodist member for several years. To many Latter-day Saints, this is confusing. Why would someone who saw an angel and gold plates join another church? Some members have the same question about Joseph Smith and say, why would somebody who saw Jesus Christ and Heavenly Father join another church after they told him that they're all wrong? Anyway, apologists suggest Oliver never denied his witness. Critics argue he either didn't believe as firmly as claimed or chose to downplay it.
All right, I want to just show, I'll just put this up on the stage just so folks understand the geography. So right where my cursor is, I don't know if you can see that or not, but where my cursor is, that's Sandusky, Ohio. That's where I grew up, lived all of my life until I was, till I moved to Southern Utah in 2015. Tiffin is a little southwest of that, not too far. I worked out in Port Clinton, which was actually up underneath here, the Sandusky Bay, Bay Point. But Tiffin is on the west, more west in Ohio. Mentor, see if I can find it up here. Top right corner, Mentor, that's near where Kirtland, Ohio was, right there. In fact, right there is Kirtland. So there's Kirtland, Ohio. And this will come into play later on when we get into some conversations about, here just a few slides about experiences with Cowdery. There's a person who claims that Cowdery did something in Michigan, when in reality, Cowdery's in Ohio. But I just want to note that Michigan is the state just northwest of Ohio. We used to have a thing that if you just walked west until you smelled it and then north until you stepped in it, that would put you in Michigan. So Tiffin is, when you say Tiffin, it's the western side of Ohio. It's not too far from Michigan, but that way folks at least understand the geography.
Thank you very much.
All right. Okay, the next slide here. Yep. So I'll just talk about what these are, and I will read these. What we're running into now, the next few slides, are what other people had to say about Oliver Cowdery when he was outside the church. In other words, they're non-members, they're not Mormons. They're having encounters with him. They either recognize or someone taking down the information or asking the questions of the person who had the experience with Oliver. They're familiar enough with Mormonism to know that this is information that should at least be recorded. So here it says, several primary documents not mentioned by Peterson, and I don't know who that is. It's the thing that this was embedded into an article by Peterson. But anyway, several primary documents not mentioned by Peterson bear directly on Oliver's joining with, I think it actually is Dan Peterson, but this is it
looks like an E.
Yeah.
And I think he's an O in more ways than one.
Yeah. So several primary documents not mentioned by Peterson bear directly on Oliver's joining with the Methodist. In 1885, 82-year-old Gabriel J. Keene, a longtime Tiffin, Ohio resident and Methodist church member, signed an affidavit in which he affirmed Mr. Cowdery expressed a desire to associate himself with the Methodist Protestant church in this city. Reverend John Souter and myself were appointed to a committee to wait on Mr. Cowdery and to confer with him respecting his connection with Mormonism and the Book of Mormon. We accordingly waited on Mr. Cowdery at his residence in Tiffin, and there learned his connection from him with that order and his full and final renunciation thereof. We then inquired of him if he had any objections to make a public recantation. He replied that he had objections, that in the first place, it could do no good, that he had known several to do so, and they always regretted it. And in the second place, it would have a tendency to draw public attention, invite criticism, and bring him into contempt. But said he, nevertheless, if the church require it, I will submit to it. But I authorize and desire you and the church to publish and make known my recantation. Now, I find that the wording here is strange, but I'll just note Oliver's about to join another church, and he does. The evidence is that he joins the Methodist Church. As he's about to do so, it makes perfect sense for them to go, you were one of the witnesses of Mormonism? Like, we're going to need to have a conversation. And, sort of like when you join Mormonism, there are things you have to sort of acknowledge you either never did or you've agreed to walk away from.
Especially if you're a polygamist.
Yeah. So they're sitting down with him. And he's noting, like, it doesn't do me any good to recant my testimony of Mormonism. Others have done it, and it doesn't go well for them.
And who's he talking about there? That seems very strange. Others have done it?
Yeah, it could just be various, Simon's writer, Thomas Marsh.
Yeah.
The moment you recant your testimony in Mormonism, stories are told about you and passed down from generation to generation. to run your name into the mud. But the sentence here seems strange to me, because he doesn't want to recant for the reasons of it doesn't do any good and it only ends up with me having repercussions that are worse. But he says, nevertheless, if the church require it, I will submit to it. But, and that word but is strange, because but would imply, I don't want you to publish this.
Right.
But you shouldn't say anything about what I'm telling you here. This is a private conversation. But we get the opposite. And so I'm left wondering if this person either broke confidence and is trying to make this sound as if he had permission to say it, or if there's some misunderstanding here. But it says, but said he, nevertheless, if the church require it, I will submit to it. But I authorize and desire you in the church to publish and make known my recantation. We did not demand it, but submitted his name to the church, and he was unanimously admitted a member thereof. At that meeting, he arose and addressed the audience present, admitted his error, and implored forgiveness, and said he was sorry and ashamed of his connection with Mormonism.
You know, things happen in weird ways in life. Nobody knows that as much as me. But it just seems strange that after all of this back and forth, and we didn't require it, then he gets up in church and he does it anyway. He does a recantation.
Yeah, it is a strange thing. And so, again, we have one witness to this. It's a little later. Who really knows exactly how this all went down? And we'll get to some of the reasons why or why not we should take this account seriously in the part on the right. But let me finish this. It is, at that meeting, he arose, he addressed the audience present, admitted his error, implored forgiveness, said he was sorry and ashamed of his connection with Mormonism. He continued his membership while he resided at Tiffin in the Methodist Church, and became superintendent of the Sabbath school, and led an exemplary life while he resided with us. So there's a positive note about his character. Keene, a respected citizen of Tiffin. Now this is the modern scholars telling to us of the data of how to put context to it. Keene, a respected citizen of Tiffin, clearly believed that Oliver Cowdery had fully renounced Mormonism. Still, certain difficulties remain with Keene's statement. He recorded the incident, apparently for the first time more than 40 years after it happened. His account was never corroborated by other witnesses, and he gave the statement at the request of Arthur B. Deming, a well-known anti-Mormon at the time, the editor of The Naked Truths About Mormonism. By the way, this is where Bryce Blankenagel gets his title for his podcast, Naked Mormonism, is from this idea. And a man likely to lead his witness. Furthermore, two equally respected citizens of Tiffin claimed that Oliver never discussed Mormonism. I think that it is absolutely certain that Mr. Cowdery, after, this is a quote, so this is one of the contemporary people to Keene and to Cowdery. Quote, I think that it's absolutely certain that Mr. Cowdery, after a separation from the Mormons, never conversed on the subject, and his most intimate friends, never conversed on the subject with his most intimate friends, and never by word or act disclosed anything relating to the conception, development, or progress of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Wrote William Henry Gibson, judge, general, orator, businessman, lawyer, and Tiffin's most famous resident.
And yet one wonders how he could know everything that Oliver Cowdery ever said to anybody in Tiffin.
Correct. He can't. But what he did observe, what he was around, what he did hear by way of gossip or rumor indicates that from his personal experience and his secondhand knowledge that Oliver Cowdery never delved into expounding on his relationship with Mormonism. William Lang, who apprenticed in Oliver Cowdery's law office and later became mayor of Tiffin and a member of the Ohio Senate, used similar language. He said, quote, now as to whether Cowdery, he says C, but Cowdery, quote, now as to whether Cowdery ever openly denounced Mormonism, let me say this to you. No man ever knew better than me how to keep one's own counsel. He would never allow any man to drag him into a conversation on the subject. And by the way, as a lawyer, again, he takes up law He serves as a lawyer in this community. It wouldn't be to his benefit to say that he was fooled by Mormonism and that he no longer believes it when he once did. That would have so many places where his credibility could have been questioned. Correct? Am I fair in saying that?
Yes, but a lawyer's credibility is never at issue and frequently questionable.
Yes. But he even mentions it in the statement to the left. Let me see where it says it. And in the second place, it would have a tendency to draw public attention, invite criticism, and bring him, meaning Oliver, into contempt.
I think that everybody would have loved him and embraced him as the prodigal son.
Yeah, that seems reasonable. That coming,
It's like, yeah, no Mormon is more loved than a returning ex-Mormon.
yeah, they can start podcasts pretty easy. You've got a good friend who did that.
Yes, he doesn't have his own podcast. He's been on a lot of podcasts. He does the whole fireside circuit there up and down the Wasatch Front.
Yeah.
That's Dusty Smith.
Dusty Smith. All right. So there's that. Let me go to the next slide here. This one was interesting. Another statement by a woman named Adeline Fuller Bernard. I'd never heard of her, and I was quite surprised to hear the claim about her relationship with Oliver. And then I needed to sort of back up whether that was true or not, and I found evidence that it was. Adeline Fuller Bernard, who lived in the Cowdery home and reported as having been adopted by Oliver and Elizabeth Cowdery, and in her 20s when Oliver joined the Methodist Church. By the way, you and I were talking earlier on the phone. Why would she be adopted in her 20s? I now get it. She was adopted by them, and when she was in her 20s, that's when Oliver joined the Methodist Church.
Okay, will you hang on with me for just a second then? Because I got to redo the math on this. If
Please.
she's in her 20s, that's in the 1840s. Oliver rejoins the church, I think 48 or 49. He passes away in 1850, so that's a hard stop. So it's in the 1840s that he joins the Methodist Church after he's excommunicated in 1838. Okay, so if she's in her 20s when Oliver joins the Methodist Church, then what? She would have been in her teens.
Yeah, she's born.
I'm starting to wonder if this was the daughter that Oliver Cowdery and his wife adopted at around the same time that Joseph Smith adopted, according to Don Bradley, I believe it was, adopted either formally or informally Fanny Alger. And that Oliver Cowdery is finding out about what Joseph Smith was doing with his adopted daughter in the circumstance where Oliver has adopted a daughter under similar circumstances at a similar time and a similar age, was especially appalling to him.
Yeah, because we're just now realizing that we misunderstood the sentence. It, as you're pointing out, RFM, I just want to make this clear to the audience. There is a time in when Oliver Cowdery is in the church where he adopts a daughter. And Dan, by the way, please jump in and put a comment in the chat. I'd really love to know whatever data you've got in your head on this. But as you were talking to me on the phone, Oliver adopts a girl when in the church, when still associated with the church, around the same time that Smith is having this relationship with Fanny Alger. And there are some historians who, in conversation around this moment, proposed that possibly he's adopting this young girl in the same way that Joseph Smith is adopting Fanny Alger. That would be an interesting, I don't know much about this story other than just that surface level understanding. But Adeline Fuller Cowdery, it is true. When Adeline Fuller Cowdery was born on the 28th of September, 1844, in Tiffin. So this is 1844 that she's born. This would be.
No, she wouldn't have been born in 1844.
Yeah, that's when they're saying this person. That's what both of these two clips posted on here are from family history sites.
Okay, well, she couldn't have been in her 20s when Oliver joined the Methodist Church. Then
Correct.
she would have
Yeah,
been 16 when he died.
That's what I was thinking when
I'm
you
sorry,
were doing.
6.
Yeah, when you were doing the math out loud, it didn't make any sense to me that she was born in the 1840s. It doesn't
Okay.
fit. It doesn't fit the math of him joining the Methodists, and it doesn't fit the math of the adopted girl in within Mormonism.
Hmm.
So I'm just going to pause there, and we can maybe leave Dan to help straighten us out. But I will note that these are family history sites that are listing it, and they are showing that she is the daughter of Oliver Cowdery and Elizabeth Ann Cowdery, which was also Elizabeth Ann Whitmer. So Adeline Fuller
Well,
Bernard.
it also says that she died in 1844, according to your history there in the bottom right.
Yeah, so that something here is off, and I'm almost guaranteeing it's the birth date, because the changing the birth date would fix 2 lines of chronology.
Okay.
So
Does this have anything to do with what she said? It might have something to do with her ability to be present to hear it. But anyway.
yeah, let's assume that she is born sometime in like the 1820s, correct? No, 1820s would probably
That's
be
what I
about.
would be thinking if I was correct the first time. I don't know.
Yeah. Dan's not saying anything, so I wonder if Dan's going into his computer doing some searching for stuff. But I'll read this. We'll just recognize that in terms of the dates, there's something off here. But Adeline Fuller Bernard, who lived in the Cowdery home and reported as having been adopted by Oliver and Elizabeth Cowdery in her 20s, when Oliver joined the Methodist Church, later claimed, I quote, and this, by the way, the quote is legitimate, and the person's legitimate, and being the adopted daughter of the Cowderys is legitimate. We're just getting the birth date incorrect. And not because we got it incorrect, but because family history sources and whatever church history place where I was looking, it all had it as this 1844. But
I think we should blame the members.
we can. The quote from her, the adopted daughter of the Cowderys, said, quote, I have often heard Mr. Cowdery say that Mormonism was the work of the devil, unquote. She made that statement in 1881. That's also camp. So she couldn't have died in 1844. That's impossible. By the way, both family history sites have 1844 as the birth date and 1844 as the death date. So I almost guarantee one site is working off of the other.
Well, she was 5 when her dad passed away, so I don't know how good her recollection would have been in 1881 about this.
Yeah.
Maybe he said it so often, she just remembered it. I don't know.
Yeah. Adeline M. Bernard to Thomas Gregg. This is found 4 March 1881, typescript, L. Tom Perry, Special Collections Library, Harold B. Lee Library, BYU. So essentially you have 2 statements indicating that Oliver made negative comments about the church, and that's really it.
By the way, I do say she was 5 when her father passed away, because I think that she wouldn't have been 6 until September of that year of 1850, and he'd passed away earlier, I think in April, right, Bill?
I don't know off the top of my head when Oliver Cowdery's death date was, but
We'll get to it.
we will.
Probably sometime around midnight.
But I will note, you've got the adopted daughter saying, yeah, we will to midnight. The adopted daughter saying he said Mormonism was of the devil. You've got this member of his church saying he recanted. And then you've got this well-known, famous person in Tiffin who says Oliver never talked bad about the Mormons. He just didn't talk about it at all. And the person who worked with him for a long period of time, did it say it was his apprentice, his understudy, that they also thought their memory was that he had never spoken about it either.
Yeah. And Adeline, by the way, a precocious child, she is actually seeing around corners and predicting effectively what President Nelson said was that Mormonism was the word of the devil.
Yeah, word works, same difference. It's a victory for Satan either way. Okay, Oliver Cowdery responds to a challenge in court about the Book of Mormon. I'm going to let you take this section.
Thank you so much. This was a huge story. This is like the biggest, best, most dramatic story of the 3 witnesses affirming their testimony under really, really incredibly difficult circumstances. And I thought that everybody had heard of this. Now, this is your slide, right? During his time in Tiffin, Oliver was once confronted in court about his signature in the Book of Mormon. At first, he claimed he didn't believe in the book, but when pressed, he clarified. See, that is such a brief synopsis of what it is. That the first time I read through that slide of yours, Bill, I didn't even recognize it as being this scene. And he clarified, this is Oliver speaking. What I there have said is true. I did see the angel in the plates. It was no dream, no imagination. Even if he wasn't preaching it, he stood by his original testimony when challenged. Okay. But that's where it's talking about it. Now, do you want me to go through the rest of the slide and then we'll go back to that part, Bill?
You could do it in whatever order you want to.
Okay. Well, I'll forget about going through the rest of the slide if I don't do it now.
Okay.
This is a wonderful, wonderful tangent we're about to go on. Later, Oliver's life briefly intersected with Mormon offshoots. After Joseph Smith's death in 1844, Oliver's father and relatives followed James J. Strang, who claimed to be Smith's successor. Oliver moved to Wisconsin, near Strang's base. Now, was it Wisconsin or Michigan, Bill? Do you know?
I think Strang starts off in Wisconsin and then moves to Michigan. And I don't know if Beaver Island is anyway. I think Strang spent time in both states.
Okay. It's all kind of the same to me from out here on the Pacific coast. Who claimed to be Smith's successor. Oliver moved to Wisconsin near Strang's base, though it's unclear if he ever joined. He practiced law and ran for office, but his health declined. He had tuberculosis like his mother. Facing his mortality, he began reaching out to old friends and re-engaging with his Latter-day Saint past. Okay, so before that final scene is about to draw upon us, let's go back to this place, this dramatic courtroom scene. And I'll go ahead and I'll shift over here. I'm going to go past this right now because I don't think this makes sense yet. And you had put this on here right before the show started. Did you want to talk about this now or later, Bill?
No, this just goes with those two previous footnotes, so we can go back into those later.
Okay, that part we will remember. And this part has nothing to do with it, actually. This is later stuff. So here's this scene. This is the 1968 movie, The Three Witnesses. This is where I first was introduced to this scene of the courtroom and Oliver Cowdery, after he's been excommunicated while he's practicing law, bearing his testimony of the Book of Mormon. So this is from timestamp 20 to, what is it, to 23, 22, just in case you need that. That's the very beginning. That's the very beginning of this. 1968 is the year, I believe, this was made. And you're going to love this, folks. I think it was also in the newer Witnesses movie with different actors. Now, can we get the volume?
A penalty must be paid. Gentlemen, the prosecution rests.
That's Oliver Cowdery. That's John Travolta.
May it please the court and the gentlemen of the jury, we have just listened to a statement by one Oliver Cowdery. He's told us a great deal about honesty. It's very interesting. Very interesting indeed. To discover that this same Oliver Cowdery was a party to one of the greatest frauds ever perpetrated upon the American people.
Your Honor, I object. This is entirely irrelevant.
On the contrary, it is quite relevant, as the prosecution is so roundly condemning the dishonesty, the criminal act of the defendant. Has not the jury the right to know the character of the one seeking judgment?
Your Honor, I object. Objection overruled.
What is Gandalf doing on the jury?
Look, the Mormon Bible, one of the greatest hoaxes the world has known. And in it, swearing that the book is true, is the signature of the man sitting before this court, Oliver Cowdery. This is the man who has testified and written that he beheld an angel of God, and that the angel showed him the plates from which the Book of Mormon was translated.
Let's have some quiet here. Quiet! Well, now, it's quite possible There could be more than one Oliver Cowdery, you know.
Then surely he'll want to clear this up.
I have a word for this, people.
Cowdery?
So he screwed me over again.
May I? We declare with words of soberness that an angel of God came down from heaven and laid before our eyes the plates and the engravings thereon. The voice of the Lord commanded that we should bear record of it. Wherefore we bear testimony of these things. I am that Oliver Cowdery. Whatever my faults and weaknesses might be, this testimony which I have written and given to the world is literally true. What I have there said that I saw, I know that I saw.
He's coming back, Ma. He's coming back.
Even at the expense of ridicule, Oliver could not deny what he knew to be true.
Oh, that's it. That's it. That's
Then
it. I love the swelling of the music. And I think he's coming back to join them. I think it's 1848 or something like that. But we'll find out.
Can I just jump in for 2 seconds here?
Yeah, please.
Only because I finally found some information there. Adeline Fuller, let me put this up on the screen.
Oh.
Adeline Fuller was born between 1810 and 1820
Yes.
and apparently lived with the Cowdery family for several years, beginning in Kirtland. This comes from Scripture Central. Thank you, Scripture Central. The Rappeleys, I believe, at one time sort of headed that up. I don't think they do anymore.
Before they got kicked out.
That's right. Beginning in Kirtland and moving with them to Far West and Tiffin, Ohio, where she married Louis Bernard in 1845. Whether she was related to Oliver's mother, Rebecca Fuller, is not known. In 1881, when she was in her 60s or 70s, she wrote 3 letters to newspaper editor and publisher Thomas Gregg, author of the anti-Mormon book, The Prophet of Palmyra. That's a good title. In the first letter, Adeline Fuller Bernard claimed, "I have often heard Mr. Cowdery say that Mormonism was the work of the devil." We talked about that. Bernard may have been recalling harsh statements Oliver made against those he held responsible for his excommunication. Again, that's
a nice spin on that from Scripture Central.
But it's one plausible thing, because I do think when we go back to, for instance, his recanting of Mormonism, Oliver might have chosen his words really carefully and recanted Mormonism in a certain way, and that guy only took away that he recanted Mormonism. And so maybe Oliver made, recalling harsh statements Oliver made against those he held responsible for his excommunication, quote, "They themselves have gone to perdition," unquote. Oliver wrote, I was just skipping ahead here. Bernard's letters are problematic for the following reasons. She apparently dictated the letters to others, and the accuracy of the handwritten transcriptions is unknown, of course. Indeed, in the second letter, Bernard herself states that her niece made errors in recording the first letter. I'm sure they weren't uber serious, but maybe they were. No originals are extant for the first 2 letters, so the accuracy as well as the provenance of the typescripts is also uncertain, and Bernard's mental stability as well as the accuracy of her memory and basic reliability is also unknown. By the way, unless we know someone's mental stability is questionable, don't we always, in all witness statements, give the witness the benefit of the doubt for being mentally stable?
I think they're really pulling out the stops to impeach this witness. They really don't like what it is that she wrote. And what it is that she wrote was that one line.
Yeah. She gets details right, such as Oliver's living in Tiffin, gets other details wrong, such as the vision of the 3 witnesses occurring at midnight. By the way, that would allow Martin Harris to be in costume.
Oh, yeah. What do you mean she gets it wrong? What do you mean she gets it wrong? Okay.
She says the vision
She's allegedly talking about what Oliver told her happened. are we
Ooh.
built into that saying that she got it wrong is the assumption that Oliver told it to her the same way as appears in the 1838 account.
Yeah. Doing these things in the dark, by the way, when you're a scam artist, doing these things in the dark of night or when the sun's setting or when the sun is barely coming up, it benefits you. Remember, Joseph gets the plates in the nighttime, gets on a dark horse and rides through the night.
I think Oliver would have been gone by the time that account was being written in the 1838. Now, there are earlier accounts, I'm sure, so I don't know if they're day or whatever. But all I'm saying is that to say that she's wrong when she's recounting what it is that her adoptive dad told her, is presuming that her adoptive dad told her what you think he told her.
They're dismissing the witness in ways that none of us do in ordinary scholarship.
This is the old me thinks the lady doth protest too much.
Yeah.
Or the lady doth protest too much, methinks. It's one of those famously misquoted Shakespeare lines that I can never remember to get straight. I just know that it's famously misquoted. Oh, church history. Yes. So I'm trying to track this down. This story that had such an impact on me as a young member in the church about the courtroom and everything. And Meridian Magazine, I found this article by Daniel C. Peterson with an O, you see. It is with an O. What happened? Oh, in an early letter, Cowdery said the vision occurred in daylight. Thank you, Dan. Thank you.
But yeah, but
what
who
happened to this?
Which one's true? Again,
What?
if Cowdery says one thing and someone else says Cowdery at another time said another,
right?
You don't necessarily have to believe the first. It's a firsthand account. It should probably be given a little more weight, but you shouldn't assume automatically that that one's telling the truth and the other one's a lie or a misunderstanding.
Right. What happened to the story about Oliver Cowdery's dramatic courtroom testimony? Because in this article, which I'm not going to reproduce here, I'm trying to find what is the source. Where does this come from, this story about the courtroom? And so I find this article. I figured Dan Peterson will cite to a source. No, the title of the article is Oliver Cowdery's Testimony of the Book of Mormon. And this most dramatic thing that he never mentions it. He doesn't mention it. He mentions all these things that are nowhere near as dramatic. And I thought, why are you not mentioning this? Dan, I need your help here. But he wouldn't help. So I had to go elsewhere to find this. And apparently, and you've confirmed this, I think, independently, as we've talked about it today. The first recorded reference to a story about Oliver Cowdery in the courtroom is not until 1881. It is found in Journal of Discourses, volume 22, page 254, in a talk titled The Abundant Testimonies to the Work of God. It is given by President George Q. Cannon and delivered in the Tabernacle in Salt Lake City, Sunday afternoon, September 18th of 1881, reported by John Irvine. And this is what he has to say now. This would have been, wow. Well, it's 1881. So that's a number of decades. That's 31 years after Oliver Cowdery passed away. And here's what he says. When I was a boy, I heard it stated. Okay, now this is how the story starts. I kid you not. It starts off with George Q. Cannon saying, when I was a boy, I heard it stated concerning Oliver Cowdery. So, I don't know, decades ago, when I was a boy, I heard this rumor circulating about Oliver Cowdery. This is the provenance for this story in its earliest incarnation. When I was a boy, I heard it stated concerning Oliver Cowdery that after he left the church, he practiced law. And upon one occasion, in a court in Ohio, the opposing counsel thought he would say something that would overwhelm Oliver Cowdery. And in reply to him, in his argument, he alluded to him as the man that had testified and had written that he had beheld an angel of God, and that angel had shown unto him the plates from which the Book of Mormon was translated. He supposed, of course, that it would cover him with confusion, because Oliver Cowdery then made no profession of being a Mormon or a Latter-day Saint. But instead of being affected by it in this manner, he arose in the court, and in his reply stated that whatever his faults and weaknesses might be, remember that line from the movie? The testimony which he had written and which he had given to the world was literally true, period. And then he goes on to something else. That is the first place that I can locate this story being told about Oliver Cowdery in court. And that's the provenance. And it's also rather general. It's not terribly specific. There will be another version of this story, which I think is based upon this story, that will go into circulation decades after this, which has an abundance of details to it. What are your thoughts about this, Bill?
Like so many things in Mormonism, when you have not a first-hand account, not a second-hand account, this is at least a third-hand account or worse, and it just sounds to me like a faith-promoting story. This seems to be created in the same kind of way that the Brigham Young Transfiguration, these miracle stories that we get in Mormonism, that we've, the Sweet River crossing. We get these stories in Mormonism where all it takes is some leader somewhere years later to say, I heard a thing from a person who heard a thing. And then suddenly this story is utilized to make faithful films by the church, which I don't think it will ever do again. I don't think it will create that Oliver Cowdery court case again, because I think it would have to acknowledge in today's scholarly world that this is a late, unreliable remembrance.
I've got to tell you, I think Daniel Peterson did relate it in the most recent Witnesses movie from, was that 10 years ago now? It's been a while, but in recent memory, at least, I didn't use that one because I thought he would probably,
But I mean the church and correlated curriculum. I doubt the church will throw this up on a screen again.
Ah, okay. That is outside. You're right. That is not in the church's curriculum. That was an independent production. So if you go to Scripture Central, once again, great apologists for the church, and they have some information on there about an article from the August 1943 improvement era. This is by C.M. Nielsen, Nielsen, and this is what it looks like. Oliver Cowdery for the defense. And now all of a sudden we have a hugely detailed account of what happened in that courtroom, because we've got an eyewitness now who saw the whole thing under the most coincidentally fortunate of circumstances. But the first thing is this: in the introduction to this, it says, from J. Tate, there comes an excerpt from the Deseret News of February 21st, 1910. 1910. That's important. Apparently, that's when the original is published of this story, 1910, in which Judge C.M. Nielsen relates an incident within an incident, a missionary experience wherein Oliver Cowdery unexpectedly figures as a prosecuting attorney who takes the stand as witness for a cause he was eminently qualified to defend.
This is 29 years after the first time a similar story is mentioned in 1881 by George Q. Cannon. This is 1910. So now we're 29 years later, and we get a second story that's a little different, but not too different. Sort of interesting.
Yeah, I think it's really clear that unless this was happening to Oliver Cowdery all the time in court, it has a relation to the first one. And I think it's dependent on it in order to have this incredibly, it's so dramatic. This is the impact it had on me, Bill. It has this impact on everybody, well, virtually everybody who sees it, because it's so damn dramatic. And an attractive story like this that's told with so little detail is going to be seized upon and elaborated upon in dramatic fashion, which is what happens here, I believe. So in 1910, this guy Nielsen relates a story he says he heard from a farmer in Michigan, not Ohio, as per George Q. Cannon, while on his mission. 1894 is the year that Nielsen hears the story from the farmer, according to Nielsen, and it was the 1840s was the decade during which the story would have occurred. Oh, and Dan's telling us Brigham Young gave an account in 1855 in Journal of Discourses. Volume 2, pages 257 through 58.
And I'll look that up while you're reading this.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Dan. So Nielsen is relating a story he heard 16 years earlier, and the unnamed farmer is relating a story that would have occurred around 50 years earlier. That's how late both of these recollections would be if this story is correct. Here's what he says. In the year 1884, remember, Nielsen's writing this in 1910. In the year 1844, I was traveling as a missionary in Minnesota. I had most of the eastern part of the state to myself. I was without purse or scrip, and apparently without companion, and one night slept in a haystack. Next day, I came to a city and wandered up and down the streets. I had no money, no friends, and didn't know where to go. I passed a large store called the Emporium. I was attracted by it, but didn't know why. There were about 25 teams hitched near the place, owned by farmers in town on business. Something told me, go over and see a certain man. The street was full of people, and I wondered which man. Then one man seemed to me as big as 3 ordinary men. The Spirit whispered, go over and speak to him. I hesitated to approach this entire stranger, but the same voice came to me a second and a third time. Then I went. He was a prosperous-looking farmer with a fine 2-seated buggy, which he was ready to enter. Not knowing what else to say, I said, how far are you going? Home. Where are you going? I have no certain place. I am from Utah. You are not a Mormon, are you? He asked anxiously. Yes. Then God bless you, he replied, reaching out his arms and dropping the lines. Get into this buggy as fast as you can. When we get home, my wife will rejoice as I rejoice now. I will then explain all. Reaching the home. Remember, this is why I set out the chronology of this story. So you can understand that this incredibly detailed account went through this incredibly tortured and lengthy process of being recounted and written down. It seems a little much. Reaching the home, he called, Mother, here's a real live Mormon elder. I'm afraid I didn't look very fine, as I had slept in a haystack the previous night. They took me by the hand and led me into the house. They called in their sons and daughters, and we sat around the table. My newfound friend then said, now, young man, can you want to read this part? What my newfound friend said, the farmer, whose name never gets mentioned, at least in this article.
Now, young man, you thought it strange how I acted when you spoke to me. When I get through, you will realize the importance of your coming to us. When I was 21 years of age, I was working my father's farm in Michigan. I had worked hard on the farm that summer and decided to take a day off. So went to the city. Near the courthouse, I saw a great many people assembling and others walking that way. So I went over to see what was up.
Yeah.
There was a jam in the courtroom. But being young and strong, I pushed my way close to the center.
I want to see what's going on.
Where I found the prosecuting attorney addressing the court and jury in a murder trial. The prosecuting attorney was Oliver Cowdery, and he was giving his opening address in behalf of the state. After Cowdery sat down, the attorney representing the prisoner arose with taunting sarcasm, said, May it please the court and gentlemen of the jury, I see one Oliver Cowdery is going to reply to my argument. I wish he would tell us something about the Mormon Bible, something about that golden Bible that Joe Smith dug out of the hill, something about the great fraud he perpetuated upon the American people, whereby he gained thousands of dollars. Now, he seems to know so much about this poor prisoner. I wonder if he has forgotten all about Joe Smith and his connection with him. The speaker all the while sneering and pointing his finger in scorn at Cowdery, in the hope of making him ridiculous before the court and jury. Everybody present began to wonder if they had been guilty of making such a mistake as choosing a Mormon for the prosecuting attorney. Even the judge on the bench began looking with suspicion and distrust at the prosecuting attorney. The prisoner and his attorney became elated at the effect of the speech. People began asking, is this he, a Mormon? Everybody wondered what Cowdery would say against such charges.
You know, I got to tell you that I know this was a long time ago, but this would have happened today in any courtroom. There's no relevance at all to the religious beliefs of the prosecuting attorney, whose credibility is not an issue for the jury to determine. Here's the thing. Anything could happen in any courtroom at any time in history. That much I've got to say. This seems really doubtful.
When I read this RFM, and this is the first time I read it. I didn't read it before tonight's show for this. When I read this just now, it reminds me of the Elder Holland telling the story about the missionary going to visit his brother and the dogs. There's several points in this story where I'm like, lots of people, big crowd, murder trial. That makes sense. I buy that. Murder trials would have been fascinating. He gets there at the beginning. He doesn't miss anything. He gets there at the opening statement. He pushes his way through the crowd, who also wants a front row seat.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, hell no, you don't push past me, young man. You're not doing that. But he pushes past, gets all the way to the front. And when he gets up there, it's just started. It's just underway. And then
a lot of lucky coincidences. And I think somewhere he tells us that he was only 3 feet away from Oliver Cowdery.
And the sneering and the jeering and the pointing, and it all comes across to me as a highly embellished story.
I think so. And it's a story about what happened in court told by a person who has no idea of what happens in court.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Anything else you want me to say about this?
No. You did so good. Let's see here. I was stunned. Finally, Oliver Cowdery arose calm as a summer morning. Never heard that expression before. I was within 3 feet of him. That's where he says it. I was within 3 feet of him. There was no hesitation. I could smell what he had for breakfast. There was no hesitation, no fear, no anger in his voice. This is not being said from a faith-promoting perspective at all. There was no hesitation, no fear, no anger in his voice as he said, "May it please the court and gentlemen of the jury. My brother attorney on the other side has charged me with connection with Joseph Smith and the Golden Bible. The responsibility has been placed upon me, and I cannot escape reply." My gosh, this so never happened. "Before God and man, I dare not deny what I have said, and what my testimony contains is written and printed on the front page of the Book of Mormon." Boy, both these guys had really good memories. "May it please your honor and gentlemen of the jury, this I say. I saw the angel and heard his voice," and it did sound a little bit like Sidney Rigdon, although I could have confused it for Martin Harris too. "How can I deny it? It happened in the daytime when the sun was shining bright in the firmament, not in the night when I was asleep, and like I told my adoptive daughter. That glorious messenger from heaven, dressed in white, standing above the ground, in a glory I've never seen anything to compare with. The sun insignificant in comparison. And this personage told us if we denied that testimony, there is no forgiveness in this life, nor in the world to come. Now, how can I deny it? I dare not. I will not."
This makes it worse. So, first off, you have a bunch of people in this crowd, in the jury, the judge, the other lawyer. None of them believe Mormonism. They all think Mormonism is ridiculous. For Cowdery to stand up and say it like this only hurts his credibility even more with a crowd that doesn't believe Mormonism in the first place. It's the absolute opposite of what anybody with any mild intelligence would do.
Well, first off, the farmer who says he was there for this, unnamed in this story, right? But it may be named somewhere else, has to remember this entire speech and everything associated with it for at least 30 years before he relates it to this other cat who's on his mission, who then has to remember it for over 20 years before he commits it to writing. That's why I say these two guys have really good memories.
Yeah.
Okay, it concludes with, no, it almost concludes. "The man who related this to me," who I'm not going to tell you his name, but I'm going to tell you all this really important stuff about him, "was a prominent man in that state, so you can trust him. He was a rich man, so you can trust him. a man who had held offices of trust from the people, so you can trust him, a man of respect, one whom you look into his face, you will not doubt. But I'm not going to tell you his name. I don't want you to track him down and talk to him. He's probably passed away by then anyway. To strengthen his statement, this man who knew nothing of Mormon history, so he doesn't know anything about Mormon history at all. Right.
He doesn't know anything about Mormon history, yet this story sticks out in his mind as important enough to remember and to retell to people.
Well, he certainly knew the part of Mormon history that Oliver Cowdery bore testimony to in exquisite and excruciating detail in front of him when he was 21 and muscled his way to the front of that courtroom. Oh my gosh. Who knew nothing of Mormon history, said Oliver Cowdery mentioned something he wanted me to explain. Did Jerusalem really have a wall? That the angel took back a part that was not translated. Well, yeah, and he took back the part that was translated. We know this, and that part of the golden plates then withheld will be revealed at some future time. Can you read this last paragraph? And the last paragraph is going to be the second to last paragraph here.
Starts with, since I heard.
Yes.
Since I heard Oliver Cowdery speak, continued my host, I have not had peace for these many years. I want to know more about your people. I felt when I listened to that Oliver Cowdery guy talking in the courtroom, he was more than an ordinary man. If you can show us that you have what Oliver Cowdery testified to, we shall all be glad to receive it. He and his whole family embraced the gospel, came to Utah, and got baptized in the waters.
But I'm not going to tell you their name. I mean, come on. Really?
Isn't it ridiculous how when you and I were young Mormons, we would read this and go, oh, hell yeah. Oh, of course, heck or fletch or fetch or whatever words we use, but oh, fetch yeah, and now you read it and you're like, this didn't happen. And you can tell it 100 places this didn't happen.
Yes. It's really amazing. But these are really the two sources for the story, I believe.
Yeah.
And my belief, though, is my speculation, I should say. My speculation is it starts with George Buchanan, who essentially does say, as he introduces this story, that I heard a faith-promoting rumor when I was a kid about Oliver Cowdery, and this is kind of what it was about. And then it becomes a real thing with a real witness, so like several degrees removed.
Yeah.
And then it really happens, and he becomes a star of stage and screen.
By the way, I think we can sort of straighten this out. You and I were debating, is this one story that's been told in two different ways? Is this two stories that actually have their each independent experience of Oliver Cowdery, that this happened to Oliver Cowdery twice? And the way that Nielsen tells the story, and Dan mentions in the chat that this was originally told, here he doesn't tell you the guy's name, but in some other place he tells you it's a guy by the last name of Barrington. And I've got that in the earlier footnotes. We'll see that. But Dan mentions that this shows up in the Journal of Discourses. I'm so glad, Dan, you said that, because I think this straightens out whether this is one story or two.
Do you have that?
Yeah, and I do. And if it's one story, by the way, what it tells you is that Nielsen is just creating a story as if he's the originator with this Barrington guy talking to him. But if it's one story, all he really did was take a previous telling of it and go, this is a whole new audience. I could tell this story. I could tell it in dramatic fashion. And then I could get like the excitement of being able to be the person who has the story. And one of the ways we would know this is, remember, George Buchanan said this correctly, happened in Ohio. Nielsen says that Barrington told him that this happened in Michigan.
Right.
Well, what would tell us if this was one story would be if the very first telling from Brigham Young actually happened in Michigan as well. And what do we find?
What?
Journal of Discourses, volume 2, page 257 and 258, top right.
Dan said this was in 1855, right?
This is in 1855. So this is earlier, 30 years earlier than the George Buchanan.
Yeah.
Brigham Young says, "Do you not know others who had manifestations almost equal to those Joseph had, but who have gone by the board?" Martin Harris declared before God and angels that he had seen angels. Did he apostatize? Yes. Though he says that the Book of Mormon is true. Oliver Cowdery also left the church. He never denied the Book of Mormon, not even in the wickedest days he ever saw, and came back into the church before he died. Well, not exactly. A gentleman in Michigan said to him when he was pleading law, "Mr. Cowdery, I see your name attached to this book. If you believe it to be true, why are you in Michigan?" The gentleman read over the names of the witnesses and said, "Mr. Cowdery, do you believe this book?" "No, sir," replied Oliver Cowdery. Remember earlier where I said at first he sort of denied it and then affirmed it? It's all based on this here. The gentleman read over the names of the witness, said, "Mr. Cowdery, do you believe this book?" "No, sir," replied Oliver Cowdery, in reference to the Book of Mormon. That is very well, but your name is attached to it, and you say here that you saw an angel and the plates from which this book is said to be translated, and now you say you do not believe it. Which time was you right?" Mr. Cowdery replied, "There is my name attached to that book, and what I have said there that I saw, I know that I saw, and belief has nothing to do with it. For knowledge has swallowed up the belief that I had in the work, since I know it's true." He gave this testimony when he was pleading law in Michigan. After he had left the church, he still believed Mormonism, and so it is with hundreds and thousands of others, yet they do not live it. It seems clear to me now, once you see this, that this story originates with Brigham Young. I don't believe this telling of the story either. And George Q. Cannon hears this story being told. Somewhere along the way, though, the fact gets corrected for him that it's not in Michigan, it's in Ohio. So when he tells the version of the story he does, it happens in Ohio. But by the time that Nielsen says it again, claiming he heard it from Barrington, he still repeats the erroneous detail of Michigan, which to me is a dead giveaway that he's simply borrowing a story from an earlier telling of Brigham Young and adapting it with embellished details to excite the audience.
I was paying as close attention as I was able to while you were reading that.
Yeah.
Because it's highly interesting. And I think that what gets added to it by George Buchanan is an entire courtroom scene when I think there's nothing about this story that indicates it happened in a courtroom. It says twice that it happened in Michigan while Oliver Cowdery was pleading law. But that's like saying while practicing law.
Yeah. While Bill
I've been here in this county practicing law, pleading law for 35 years, but that doesn't mean I spend every second in a courtroom.
Yeah, Bill went fishing while he was working as a floor covering salesman. Doesn't mean I went fishing while I was at work.
Did you see anything in there that indicates that it happened in a courtroom setting?
No, in fact, the language the language seems like it would have left plenty of room for him to insert legal offices of what would be going on in a courtroom, whereas he uses more general language. The gentleman read. Now the gentleman read over the names of the witnesses. Of course, that's the three witnesses. Yeah,
if you believe this testimony, why are you in Michigan? Not why are you practicing law? Not why are you calling my client a liar and a deceiver when you're obviously associated with one?
Yeah, this is how faith promoting stories like the Sweet River Crossing, the Transfiguration of Brigham, these are how these kinds of stories get started. Somebody hears something. By the way, if you were in the audience listening to Brigham Young, it would be easy for you to have pictured a courtroom story as that's being told.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think that straightens it out. The fact that Michigan is mentioned by Brigham Young in 1855 and then again by Barrington implies to me that Nielsen is just stealing a story and repurposing it for his own grandeur.
Possibly. It's very, very interesting. And, it's so faith promoting. I had coined this expression this afternoon when I think I was on the phone with you. It might have been when I was on the phone with Rebecca. But this story is too good to be true. And it's also too good not to use. Although it does seem to be following in some sort of disfavor. And I wonder if that's because it's becoming more well known that its provenance is so shaky.
Yeah, if you're the LDS Church, please don't reuse this. I mean, if you just want to piss us off, you could, but if you reuse it, you would be using something that is highly questionable and suspect.
Yes. I think that's mostly what we have to say about this. Did you want to say anything more about it before we got to the reconciliation and final testimony?
Yeah, we can go back just for a split moment. I won't spend much time on it. But I'll note that there are two references. These are both in book 2. I don't remember the full title, Dan. I'm really sorry for that. But it is these hard to find Mormon documents.
It's called Dan Vogel's Big Book of Mormon Documents.
Yeah, and this is volume 2. And these footnotes are in the section on Oliver Cowdery that have to do with this courtroom testimony. There's one here that notes that the earliest known statement about Cowdery's courtroom testimony, this is the earliest known statement. It's Richard Anderson does some talking about it. I'm only going to say this about these two. In one of these footnotes, there's a little bit of credibility given, and then in the other footnote, it is acknowledged how problematic it is.
Well, Richard Anderson, of course, being the professor, the BYU professor who was an apologist with a speciality in the witnesses.
Yeah. Richard Anderson notes sort of the credibility of it in Dan's footnote. Dan in his other footnote is acknowledging that it's problematic. Barrington's mention. So there is that. So I don't need anything else. Oh, and this one here was just another LDS document that had the same story in it. And it had a footnote that also talked about Nielsen reports hearing that this came from Robert Barrington, who was age 82. I don't know if that's at the time he tells it or when it happened or what, but testifies to hearing Oliver Cowdery tell a jury. I have a hunch that this Robert Barrington never existed, by the way. And I'll leave it up to Mormon apologists to prove me wrong, since that story sounds so absurd.
We're getting really late here. And so there was something you had skipped by with the slides that had to do with another story, another affidavit that was signed by a person as to a strong testimony that Oliver Cowdery bore in 1849 when he was ailing, but not yet gone, obviously. And it's simply another one of these situations where the provenance of it, when you look at it, is so far removed. And once again, it's a junior quoting a father who says that he heard it from somebody else. It's so amazing that these kind of steps get taken with Oliver Cowdery. And my impression of him, Dan, this is my impression, okay? I know you study this a lot more than I have, so let me know what you think. My impression is that the people who talked about Oliver Cowdery as keeping his cards close to his vest and not talking about Mormonism and refusing to be drawn into talking about Mormonism, they're probably the closest to being right. And that Oliver Cowdery, therefore, because he refuses to talk about Mormonism in the decade that he separated from the church, then he becomes a blank canvas that people can come to and paint on him whatever it is they want that fits their own narrative. That's my take on Oliver Cowdery.
And I think that happens so many other places. Again, we mentioned already tonight, Simons Ryder and Thomas Marsh, when it's easy for Mormons to create stories that allow you to dismiss the apostates and stories that allow you to create embellished, faithful stories about those who return. And you see it over and over and over again.
The main thing, though, I think, Bill, and that we've talked about, that's important to stress, is that I don't think there's any dispute over the fact that Oliver Cowdery did return to the church in his illness, and he probably bore testimony on his deathbed that the Book of Mormon was true, and that his testimony of the Book of Mormon was true. I'm not trying to dispute that at all. It just seems that there's so much effort by Mormon apologists, Mormons, to gild the lily, so to speak, and have all these other incredible dramatic things that happened to Oliver Cowdery during this period of silence when he's away from the church. And then they have also critics from the church who want to come up with stories that say he denied his testimony, which are similarly on probably very shaky ground.
Yeah, 100%. So we're heading into, I think we got two little sections left. Reconciliation, final testimony. So as the saints prepared to head west, Oliver Cowdery reconnected with church leaders expressing a desire to return. Phineas Young was a big help in all of this because he had married Cowdery's half-sister, Lucy P. Young. In 1848, he traveled to Canesville, Iowa, where he publicly reaffirmed his testimony of the Book of Mormon, declaring he had seen an angel and handled the plates. He denied authorship conspiracy theory, stating plainly, I wrote it myself as it fell from the lips of the prophet, acknowledging past mistakes. Oliver was rebaptized by Orson Hyde on November 12th, 1848, and warmly welcomed back into the church. So he was rebaptized. I thought he had died before he was able to rejoin the saints. I guess it was just rejoin them physically in Utah.
Yeah.
But he had, in terms of his membership, rejoined. Eager to help, Oliver planned to join the saints in Utah, but first visited David Whitmer in Missouri, hoping to persuade his old friend to reunite with the church. Whitmer, while still affirming his testimony of the Book of Mormon, rejected Brigham Young's leadership and declined. Oliver, in poor health, remained in Missouri. On March 3rd, 1850, Oliver Cowdery died of tuberculosis at age 43. Is that right, by the way? 1850, yeah, so that would be right. In my head, I was imagining him living just a little longer than that, but 43. And David,
3 and a half.
I think that's interesting too, by the way. He's one of the three witnesses, and he dies in the home of one of the other three witnesses. I think that's sort of, if you're going to die, you're Oliver Cowdery, you're going to die. Why not die in the arms of David Whitmer,
And they both died on the 4th of July.
Yeah. No.
Believe it or not.
Yeah, no, it says March 3rd. Oliver Cowdery died of tuberculosis, age 43, David Whitmer's home. In his final moments, he gathered loved ones and again bore witness of the angel and the plates. To David, he urged, be true to your testimony of the Book of Mormon. He was buried in Richmond, Missouri, with a headstone honoring him as the Book of Mormon witness, the identity that defined his legacy. It also strikes me that Brigham Young could have been sort of telling this story, which has a bit of similarity to it. Again, Cowdery's only 43. He's certainly he just got sick suddenly from tuberculosis. He was still practicing law, I imagine. These events are all so close together that, Brigham's saying that story in 1855, 5 years after this, and some of how he expresses his testimony here sounds really similar to this time when he was practicing law. I'll just note that. Okay, next. I thought this was an interesting story. While in Richmond, John Henry Smith and his party visited local cemeteries, trying to locate the graves of Cowdery, Page, and Whitmer. President Smith wrote, and that's John Henry Smith, we went to the old graveyard to visit the grave of Oliver Cowdery and Hiram Page, but we could not locate them. But we're told they were in the north end of the cemetery. President Smith was obviously not aware that Hiram Page was not buried in Richmond and that David Whitmer was buried in a different Richmond cemetery. That's unfortunate. President Smith and his company apparently came into contact with George W. Schwick, Cowdery's nearest living relative in the Richmond area. Schwick's mother, Julia Ann, was the daughter of David Whitmer, Cowdery's nearest living relative and also related to David Whitmer. Yeah, because that whole family, they were... Yeah, anyway. All right, so Cowdery's brother-in-law. President Smith promised Schwick that the church would erect a monument in Cowdery's memory. Schwick and A.K. Rayburn, a 93-year-old former sheriff who claimed to be present when Cowdery was buried in March 1850, helped President Smith identify Cowdery's final resting place. And this was the picture that was attached to that story. I see
He's got a good memory too.
Say that again.
He's got a good memory too.
I see a stone here with Whitmer's name on it, a J and E Whitmer.
Yeah.
So I believe that it's accurate.
Stones are easy. It's what's underneath it. That's the question, I think.
I know. There was no picture of the original headstone for Oliver Cowdery. And it seems like they had a lot of trouble finding it. And you can see in this next story, this was several paragraphs later in this process. And this article is about the future memorial headstone that eventually gets put in place that honors all of the three witnesses. One of the three witnesses on three of the sides of this stone. You'll see it here in a second. And then Joseph Smith on the fourth side. And I'll just note that as they're going through this story, you see here at the bottom, still concerned that Oliver Cowdery's gravesite had not been correctly identified, Wells visited the graveyard on August 9th with A.K. Rayburn. Again, that's the 93-year-old former sheriff who claims to have been present when Cowdery was buried.
You just know he's not going to walk out there in a straight line and say, this is definitely the place.
This is the place.
You know, this took all day. This probably took a whole weekend.
What irony it would be if he went out there with a cane and tapped it on the ground and said, this is the place. So Wells did this again on August 18th and again on November 23rd to gain complete assurance. Again, the guy's 93 years old. You're like, let me test him a few times. Let me spin him around in a circle, and then let me take him into a general area and see if he finds it again. And he does all three times. Rayburn provided the same description. After repeatedly hearing Rayburn's description, Wells went to the cemetery to carefully review what he had been told. He wrote, quote, I found by measuring the distance between the graves and between the headstones and footstones that there were two graves shorter than the grave of a full-grown man, north of the depression, which was supposed to be the grave of Oliver Cowdery. By some digging, we found the rotting stones that had supported the headstone, which was gone, and 6.5 feet eastward, a large, though crumbling footstone. This supplied whatever assurance was lacking as to the identity of the grave we sought, especially as the next grave 7 feet southward was that of a child. So he finally thinks he found it.
Well, I'm convinced.
Yeah, that was good. You know, it was 6.5 feet. Oliver was 5'11". Good enough.
The single most important part of that entire paragraph, I think, is that had okay, wait a second. The depression, okay, north of the depression, which was supposed to be the grave. Every other piece of description hinges upon that. It's supposed to be the grave of Oliver Cowdery.
According to 93-year-old former Sheriff Rayburn.
And he wouldn't lie.
No. So this is the memorial headstone that ends up getting built. Again, you see Oliver Cowdery's name. You see Whitmer on the left. Either Martin Harris or Joseph Smith is on the right, and then whoever's left is on the back side.
Now, what are you talking about when you say that? You're talking about the big thing?
No, the very foot of it. See Oliver Cowdery's name. Oh, no. I'm sorry. Let me. I'm on my monitor. Here's the picture. So this gets put in the place on top of Oliver Cowdery's grave, and Cowdery's name is on one side, Whitmer's on another, and then Joseph Smith and Martin Harris make up the other two sides.
Man, they don't want that guy getting out, do they?
No, he's trapped. I mean, Jesus is going to have to work some extra magic in the second coming here, and when the first resurrection happens, assuming Oliver does come forth in the first resurrection.
Yeah, he's going to need a little help.
And in other pictures, when you look at modern pictures of this, you can see them standing in mud. It's a mess. It must have just rained.
Mm.
In future pictures of this, it looks to be sitting on top of like concrete slab. I don't have that picture here, but I'll just note if you go online and look it up, you'll see what I'm talking about.
This is the part which I'll just breeze through. Were you done with that, Bill?
Yeah, please.
That I'll just breeze through that I had alluded to not too long ago, where sometimes Oliver Cowdery is reported to have said to a man named Jacob F. Gates in a notarized affidavit, so it must be true. Jacob, I want you to remember what I say to you. I am a dying man, and what would it profit me to tell you a lie? I know that this Book of Mormon was translated by the gift and power of God. My eyes saw, my ears heard, and my understanding was touched. And I know that whereof I testified is true. It was no dream, no vain imagination of the mind. It was real. Oliver Cowdery. So this is from an affidavit, weighing Oliver's credibility as a witness. Hang on a second here. This was actually something I think that we had. If you'll just give me just a second here to go back. And Bill, can you say something clever while I'm doing this? I apologize.
Yeah, I don't know anything about this, but I did think you had something earlier
This
that
is it.
there it is. That says Gates to it. Go back.
This is it.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
this is the testimony of Jacob Gates you can find. I'm not going to read through the whole thing, but it does start with my father, Jacob Gates, while on his way to England in 1849, stopped at the town of Richmond, where lived at that time Oliver Cowdery. So this is going to be what Oliver Cowdery told this guy's dad in 1849. He is signing this affidavit in 1912. Okay, so in 1912, this Jacob Gates is saying that my dad visited Oliver Cowdery in 1849. I think that's 63 years, isn't it? Yeah. And so I'm going to tell you all about what my dad told me Oliver Cowdery told him. And this isn't about the courtroom. This is just about visiting him. And, he answered not a word when he challenged him. He asked him about your witness of the Book of Mormon. He rose from his easy chair, went to the bookcase, took down a Book of Mormon of the first edition, turned to the testimony of the three witnesses, and read in the most solemn manner the words to which he had subscribed his name. Nearly 20 years before, facing my father, he said, "Boy, you can actually see the overacting just in the way the story's told. Jacob, I want you to remember what I say to you. I am apparently he did word for word. I am a dying man, and what would it profit me to tell you a lie? I know," said he, "that this Book of Mormon was translated by the gift and power of God," etc., etc. And so it was no dream. Then father asked this question: "If all that you tell me is true, why did you leave the church? Huh, Oliver? Huh?" Oliver made only this explanation. Said he, "When I left the church, I felt wicked. I felt like shedding blood, but I have got all over that now." Strange response. Anyway, so the state of Utah County, this is what is in the last paragraph there, that the notary says that the person who is making this, Jacob Gates, says that he's a citizen of the United States of the age of 57 years and that he is the son of Jacob Gates, who prior to his death related to Affia in a conversation which he had with Oliver Cowdery at the town of Richmond, state of Missouri, and that the above and foregoing is a true and correct statement of said conversation is given to him by his father. Now, his father passed away 20 years before his son made this statement about what his father said. Oliver Cowdery told him. So you've got a difference of 40 years or so between the father relating to his son what Oliver Cowdery said, and 20 years or so after the father says it to the son, that the son writes it down, that this is what my dad told me. This is what we call a shaky provenance, especially since it's so obviously cited in the way that one would expect the person who subscribed to it would slant it. Yeah, there's the breakdown. 1849, Jacob Gates Sr. is reported to have spoken to an ailing Oliver Cowdery. And at the time, Jacob Gates Sr. was a member of the first 7 presidents of the 70. Yes, this is a very Mormon family. 1892, Jacob Gates Sr. passes away, and 20 years later, in 1912, Jacob Gates' son claims he heard his father tell him the story about what happened with Oliver Cowdery in 1849. So, that was that. And I think that concludes what we're talking about. It's just this Oliver Cowdery. You can see people painting these stories using him as the central figure because he's so important to both sides. To have him continually affirming his testimony, even in the most trying of circumstances, is wonderfully faith affirming. On the other hand, to have him denying his testimony would be wonderful for the other side. And I think the fact that he said so little ends up being making him the perfect canvas.
Yeah, we actually run into one of these moments where somebody attempts to make him out to work against the church. So here we go. Weighing Oliver's credibility as a witness. Cowdery's credibility is complicated. He never publicly recanted his testimony in ways that we could ascribe any sort of level of certainty to. Again, we get these stories, and we also get these stories where he affirms his testimony that also don't seem to quite add up. Not even after being excommunicated does he seem to say a whole lot. When directly challenged, he consistently seems to reaffirm what he'd seen, at least in his final testimony he does. And I think you and I both agree that he probably said something exact or similar to what is claimed he said at the end.
He came back to the church.
Yep. He faced exile, ridicule, poverty, but still clung to that story. But also in other statements, we get indications that if that's true, what his motivation might have been, that he was sort of nervous about what it would mean for his reputation or for himself if he worked against his previous testimony, that he, again, in one statement, it didn't work out good for others who had done that. So you can see that from that point of view as well. But his choices during this time away from Mormonism do raise questions. He joined the Methodist Church, expressed regret about his Mormon past, according to some eyewitnesses, and served in a leadership role. If he truly believed the LDS Church held God's one true authority, but leadership role in the Methodist Church. How could he comfortably join another faith? Well, again, you pointed out Joseph Smith did the same, and Mormons have no problem with that. Maybe he separated belief in the Book of Mormon from loyalty to Joseph Smith, or maybe he just stopped believing altogether but wasn't ready to say it out loud. When I look around at all of the post-Mormons and believers of various persuasions today, I think it's really hard without someone being really direct with you to know what's in someone's heart and mind, because we have so many various kinds of faithful Mormons, and we have so many kinds of people who have left the church, post-Mormons, that I think it's impossible just to look at the events of someone's life and guess at what they felt or believed about something. So his character cuts both ways. Oliver was respected in his community, became a lawyer, elected as a justice of the peace. Clearly wasn't seen as a fraud by some, but his belief in folk magic and divining rods, his willingness to believe in Hiram Page's bogus revelations, show that he may not have been the most discerning person either. His fallout with Joseph involved serious accusations on both sides, which damaged his reputation. Joseph seemed to have gotten away from it pretty decent. Church leaders accused him of dishonesty and even adultery, though these were likely smears. Critics say his mystical mindset made him prone to being swept up in spiritual hype. Defenders say he was a sincere man with real experience who held firm despite hardship. Oliver also had complex motives. Early on, he gave time and money to support Joseph in the church, but as the movement evolved, Oliver grew uneasy with its direction, especially that of its financial entanglements and Smith's intimate relationships with women and children. He wanted to separate faith from power. He says that in his resignation letter, and while Joseph blended the two after leaving, Oliver focused on his legal career, and likely, according to those, at least one person who was really close to him, likely kept quiet about his Mormon past because it hurts his public standing. When he returned to the church near the end of his life, it might have been about conscience, it might have been about faith, could have been about legacy, maybe it was all three. But coming back, he reclaimed control over his story, and he ensured that he be remembered as a faithful witness, not a fallen one. And I think there's some value in intentionally doing it that way. I know people today who don't believe, and I know a lot of people today who don't believe, but they stay attending at church. They pretend to be faithful. They work at the universities. They work in the church history department. And they just want to get through their life being seen as a faithful Mormon, even though they have doubts in their mind and serious reservations about whether this church is true or not.
Yes, he and Joseph Smith started this whole thing. He came along at a propitious time after Martin Harris had fizzled in a major way. And one cannot help but think that Joseph Smith would have seen a special providence in the appearance of Oliver Cowdery on the scene to be his new scribe, one with whom he was so simpatico. And yet, I think that what began as a great friendship and probably continued as a great friendship, there were points at which they rubbed up against each other. They had different ideas, that Joseph Smith asserted himself over Oliver Cowdery in ways that Oliver Cowdery did not appreciate. And then he started seeing really bad things happening. And he said, I can't be a part of this anymore. I think the point came when the church was not big enough for both of them. And he came back after Joseph Smith had died.
Yeah, I think it's important to note. I put the 5 strongest reasons to view Oliver Cowdery's testimony with skepticism. 1, he was deeply involved in folk magic and supernaturalism. I think that raises credibility issues all on its own. Again, he believed in the revelations of Hiram Page, so he seemed to struggle to discern what a real revelation was from a false one.
He also believed the revelations of Joseph Smith.
Yes.
We
Yes.
can make the same conclusion from that.
His public denial or silence during estrangement, his motives and social pressures. Oliver had a lot to gain early on by aligning with Smith. Later, when his reputation was in ruins, rejoining the church gave him a path to restore his legacy. And number 5, conflicts, accusations, and character attacks. And here's my point. If you're a believing Mormon, you go, well, he believed Hiram Page's revelations. He's involved in treasure digging.
He works with a rod.
Yeah. When Oliver fell out with church leaders, they accused him of dishonesty. So again, if you're a believer in the church and you believe your church leaders when they excommunicate Oliver, although he also resigns, but I think the excommunication is what stood. You have to believe those leaders in what they said Oliver Cowdery's had done. He had been dishonest. He committed fraud, and so it's your church that's questioning the credibility of Oliver Cowdery. All the critic is doing is going, yeah, we agree with you. Maybe there's things about Oliver Cowdery that hurt his credibility.
It's Joseph Smith who's saying you can't trust him. But by the way, here's the Book of Mormon. Look at the testimony of 3 witnesses and believe that.
Yeah. In fact, I think Joseph called him an evil man or something, didn't he? He called him some sort of extreme language.
Too mean to be mentioned. I think the wicked man may have been Martin Harris. So it was all very, there's a lot of name calling going on Joseph Smith's part back then, usually with people who didn't agree with him.
I came across this pamphlet called Defense by Oliver Cowdery. Defense has sort of, you said this, I thought it was an incorrect spelling. You said, no, it's a secondary lesser used spelling.
I think that's true.
Of defense. And I think you're right. But Defense by Oliver Cowdery, a witness to the divine authenticity of the Book of Mormon. These are quotes that came out of it. And I want to read a few of these, maybe all of them, but I want to read a few of them at least. On Joseph Smith turning against him, quote, I deny that I have ever conspired with any or ever exerted any influence to destroy the reputation of the first elder, although he has done everything he could to injure my standing, and his influence has been considerably exerted to destroy my reputation, and I fear my life.
Now, this is a quote purportedly from Oliver Cowdery, who purportedly wrote this pamphlet, right?
Yeah.
Which ultimately you're going to say we probably shouldn't believe it anyway.
I think it's 100% we shouldn't believe it. But
I just want to make sure everybody knew that up front so they didn't muddle this with more legitimate quotes from Oliver.
Yeah, it was in reading these quotes that my radar went off, and I said, first off, I've never heard these. And in regards to a witness of the Book of Mormon, me not hearing some important detail about things they said critical of the church, I find it hard that I wouldn't have come across this yet. And there were certain things, and I'll get to as I read a few of these, that I just didn't feel like, well, that doesn't seem right. So on doubting Joseph's priesthood authority, quote, when the Church of Christ was set up, he was called first elder and I was called second elder, and whatever he had of priesthood, about which I'm beginning to doubt, also had I. On false revelations, the Toronto mission, going to Canada, quote, you will remember that revelation which sent Brother Page and me so unwisely to Toronto. We did not find the man and had to return surprised and disappointed. I strove to drive away the foreboding that the first elder had made tools of us.
Tools? Is it tools and not fools?
Tool, yeah. Where we thought we were divinely commanded. This was a big one. On recognizing the voice of the angel, sounded like Sidney Rigdon. The voice of the angel did most mysteriously resemble the voice of Elder Sidney Rigdon.
That one is the one that's hardest to believe that Oliver Cowdery really wrote that.
Yep. I'd heard that quote before, but in the mouth of the Palmyra residents speaking to Philastrius Hurlbut and Eber D. Howe. And I'd never heard it placed in the mouth of Oliver Cowdery, and my radar went off high pitch at that moment. On Joseph forming violent secret societies, he would influence the prophet into the formation of a secret band. He's talking about Sidney Rigdon, by the way. Again, it's not him really, but the quote claims that Sidney Rigdon is the one that's he. So Rigdon would influence the prophet into the formation of a secret band at Far West committed to the depredations upon Gentiles and the actual assassination of apostates. Only one of many wrong steps. I thought if that quote was real, I would know that quote, having studied the Danites and looking for where that originated and people not really sure exactly when those moments were. And then on translation with no plates visible, I seriously wondered whether the prophet and I were men in our sober senses when he would be translating and the plates not be in sight at all. Now, to run forward with this as if it were true is the kind of thing that Jonah Barnes and Ward Radio, it's the kind of things they do. But my radar went off and I went looking and I found this is where Fair Mormon is where I got the best contextualized answer on this. Oliver,
it sounds like a third party who's not favorably inclined toward the Mormon Church doing a running commentary on Oliver Cowdery's story.
You mean Fair?
No, I'm talking about these quotes in this book written defense by Oliver Cowdery. It sounds like a non-member third party, not favorably inclined toward the Mormons, doing a running commentary on Oliver's story.
Gotcha. Fair had this to say. They said, although this document purports to have been published in 1839 by Oliver Cowdery, the earliest copies in existence are dated 1906. The document was discovered by Reverend R.B. Neal, who is a leader in the American Anti-Mormon Association. So you nailed it. No reference to this document exists prior to 1906. This document was believed to be authentic for many years until it was discovered that it consisted primarily of a selection of Cowdery's phrases taken from various issues of the Latter-day Saints Messenger and Advocate that were removed from their original context and placed in a different context. A number of talking points appear to have been reworded from David Whitmer's 1887 address to all believers in Christ. By the way, we've got to do a future episode where we just tackle that 1887 address to all believers in Christ. I think that is such an important pamphlet in Mormon history. Historians now agree that this document is a forgery, and that came from Fair. And I say, for once, we can trust them.
Let's say we can believe them. No, let's say we can agree that they're correct on this particular issue.
Yeah. So Oliver Cowdery's final testimony, Elder Phineas Young was present at Oliver Cowdery's death at Richmond, Missouri, March 3rd, 1850. His last moments were spent in bearing testimony of the truth of the gospel revealed through Joseph Smith in the power of the holy priesthood, which he had received through his administrations.
I thought he received the holy priesthood through the administrations of angels.
His last moments were spent in bearing testimony of the truth of the gospel revealed through Joseph Smith and the power of the holy priesthood, which he had received through his administrations. I think the his is saying Cowdery's administrations with spirits. So I know it's a little confusing, but I think it could be understood either way.
I think it's at midnight again.
Oliver Cowdery's half-sister, Lucy P. Young, widow of Phineas Young, relates that Oliver Cowdery, just before breathing his last, asked his attendants to raise him up in bed that he might talk to the family and his friends who were present. He then told them to live according to the teachings contained in the Book of Mormon and promised them if they would do this, they would meet him in heaven. He then said, "Lay me down and let me fall asleep." A few moments later, he died without a struggle. David Whitmer testified to Apostles Orson Pratt and Joseph F. Smith in 1878 as follows, quote, "Oliver died the happiest man I ever saw. After shaking hands with the family and kissing his wife and daughter, he said, quote, 'Now I lay me down for the last time. I am going to my Savior,' unquote. And he died immediately with a smile on his face." So there's that. And I won't even go into those just because we've gone so long. They were there sort of as a filler, some interesting other side points.
But a couple of them we've already talked about, so it wouldn't take that long to touch on them.
Well, this was interesting. Prior to the winter of 1830-31, Cowdery generally signed his name Oliver H.P. Cowdery, likely representing the names Hazard and Perry. Oliver Hazard Perry was a recent war hero who decisively defeated the British on Lake Erie in the War of 1812. Criticism of his use of this pretentious moniker by the Palmyra Reflector in June of 1830 probably influenced Cowdery to abandon his temporary usage of the initials.
Oliver H.P. Lovecraft.
Yeah, so that was sort of interesting. After the Smiths' death in June 27th, 1844, a succession crisis split the Latter-day Saint movement. We've already talked about this, so we'll skip over it, but it was he aligned with James Strang, as well as members of his family did also. Number 3, when Cowdery applied to be rebaptized, the 12 referred the application to the High Council in Iowa, which convened a meeting with all high priests in the area to consider the matter. It was only after
Bill, was that in Pottawatomie County?
Puxatawney. What's
Bill? I think it's Pottawatomie.
Yeah, you got it. But what is the word from Pete the Magic Dragon?
I have no idea. I've avoided watching that movie for my entire life.
I've got it. It's Passamaquoddy. So Pottawatomie County, Iowa, which convened a meeting with all high priests in the area to consider the matter. It was only after Cowdery convinced the meeting attendees that he no longer maintained any claim to leadership. So you can see what happens here. You can, because he's got authority. If you reinstate him as the first elder, as the Book of Mormon witness,
he's a contender for the throne.
Yeah. So the only way, this didn't come from them. This is Salt Lake, Brigham Young. Make sure you get him to acknowledge, I have no desire and no intention for authority in this church. I give up all of that. Then he was allowed to be rebaptized, and his application was approved. This was the stuff on the wood scrape. We've already gone into that. And then this last one, Cowdery and his family attended the Congregational Church in Pulteney, Vermont.
This is the View of the Hebrews.
Yeah, View of the Hebrews, which we've already gone into as well. So
Pete the Dragon has a magic word in it too?
No. In Pete the Magic Dragon, the Disney, the old Disney version, which I think is a great
with Helen Reddy,
a great movie for kids. There is the scam doctor who drives town to town selling potions and stuff off the truck.
Okay.
And the town in which Pete's Dragon takes place is Passamaquoddy. So when when the junk doctor gets to town,
he's a mountebank.
He's trying to build trust with the local citizens. And so he's singing a song in Disney style, and he keeps trying to get the name of the town right. So Packamalotti, Pickamasquatty, Packamanotti, and he never gets it. And
these were not the golden days of Disney. The 70s was a barren wasteland, and the 80s not much better. Until they got to The Little Mermaid.
Somebody's saying you mean Disney's Pete's Dragon. Am I not saying Pete's Dragon?
You're saying Pete the Magic Dragon.
All right, well, he's a magic dragon.
Like Peter, Paul, and Mary.
Aren't all dragons magic?
Pete the Magic Dragon. Lived in Passamaquoddy.
Off the Magic Dragon. But Passamaquoddy, Pete's Dragon, the old Disney movie. Anyway, I do want to.
Mickey Rooney, too. Mickey Rooney was in that, wasn't he?
Mickey Rooney was in that. He played a drunk father. It was really the daughter who is the reasonable lighthouse keeper.
So he was typecast.
Yeah, her dad fell off the wagon, and then he sees the dragon, and nobody believes him because he's
drunk.
Yeah,
he's a drunk Irishman.
Yeah, I guess you did see the movie, huh?
No, I'm just imagining it. You're such a good storyteller.
Let me just say, before we just close this out, we've gone so long. I do want to just spend a few minutes, you and I, chatting about what we make of Oliver Cowdery. Now gone into this, seen all the data, the details, all going, rehashing it all over again, learning a few new things. We talked about Martin Harris a few weeks ago, and I think it's obvious that the real Martin Harris, the church shares the story in such a way as to provide a lot of blind spots to the members, so they don't really get a good feel for who Martin Harris exactly is. Having gone through that episode, here we are, Oliver Cowdery. How do you think Oliver Cowdery fares in terms of the church narrative about him? And what do you think now, having gone into this data?
I think that whatever the specifics may be, and in spite of all the stories that were made up on both sides and retroactively applied to Oliver Cowdery to make him say stuff that I'm sure he never said in situations that never happened, I think that he believed that he had an experience with the divine and a vision that convinced him of the truth of the Book of Mormon, and that he maintained that to the end of his life, or at least at the end of his life. I can't say, throughout that time period and what he was saying. Apparently, his adoptive daughter, who would have been of age to have heard him say it a lot, says that what he said was about Mormonism being the work of the devil. That's got to factor into it too. But you see, a lot of times when we're dealing with things, we would like people to be the same. First off, we want them to be simple and easily understood historically, if they're important to us, or either pro or negative. We want them to be simple, easily understood, and consistently that simple and easily to be understood way throughout their entire life. When for most of us, if we look at our own lives, we find we're not really that simple, easy to be understood, and we've changed our mind from time to time about even important issues in our life. So to then take the reality of what is the complexity of the human experience and apply it to Oliver Cowdery, I think makes him come more alive. I think there are people who deal with conflict in different ways. I know that he was conflicted with Joseph Smith, and that's what ended up getting him dissatisfied and ultimately excommunicated from the church. But there are some people who will direct that conflict outward and be all in your face 24/7. And then there are other people who will take it inside and internally and will become quiet. And I think Oliver Cowdery was more the latter kind of person. And only when he was driven to extremes did he come out and make the accusations against Joseph Smith, even likely knowing as he did so that it was performative, that he was making a point, and that ultimately the church would back him. He knew that Joseph Smith was going to make the same accusations against him. I expect he'd seen him do it a number of times before that. He certainly did it a number of times after this as well. But I think he finally got to the point where he couldn't bear it anymore. He couldn't keep it inside anymore. And he burst in a fit of righteous anger, which got him excommunicated. And then he's gone for 10 years, not talking about it. And then something happens. Joseph Smith is gone. He knows that. And he decides he's sick. He's ill. He'll come back to the church. You can speculate as to why that was. I think that part of it is because he believed that he'd had that divine experience regarding the Book of Mormon, and he wanted to be associated with the church again. Although I've got to tell you, if his problem, one of the main problems he had, I'm sorry, you didn't expect this, and I didn't expect it either. Over his leaving the church was Joseph Smith's activities with Fanny Alger, as well as other things. But he's applying for readmission and rebaptism into a church that is officially polygamist at this point, unless he doesn't know that. And he's being lied to about that, and that's being hidden from him. But once again, people are wonderfully complicated. It's what makes life interesting.
Yeah, I'll say it doesn't seem like Cowdery had a problem with Mormonism. His problem was with the character of Joseph Smith. And so, like you said, Smith's out of the way, then there's a path back to the church. I think the church doesn't do its members justice by the way it tells the story of Martin Harris. And we'll find, I already know this, but we'll find when we do the episode on David Whitmer that the church isn't sharing the full story on David Whitmer and doing right by its members either. But I actually think it does a decent job of telling the Oliver Cowdery story. Again, it needs to never tell the courtroom story again. But if I take that out of the way, for the most part, I feel like they're representing Oliver Cowdery moderately fairly. And I'm surprised that I'm saying that, because there's very few issues in the church where I think the church presents any topic, issue, personality in a way that is even moderately historically accurate. But I think with Oliver, they do that. And I don't really have any major beef. I think Oliver being used by the church as a faith-affirming tool, I think they're pretty much utilizing it the way that they have room to do so.
I would suggest one reservation I might have to that is the intentional hiding of Oliver Cowdery's history with working with the divining rod and all those things in order to make it sound more like he's just a regular school teacher than someone who's deeply involved in this kind of magical worldview.
Yeah, by saying he was a teacher then and a lawyer later, you're indicating that he was a rational, logical human being in between. And
well, I think he was. I think he was both at the same time.
Yeah, he was also into the supernatural. He was into dowsing rods. He was into folk magic and seer stones, and he happily helped Joseph convert a Nephite spectacles into a seer stone by using the word Urim and Thummim, and in some ways he's complicit in sort of covering up the folk magic aspects of Mormonism. But even with that, I think of all the three witnesses and of all the other characters in Mormonism, Oliver Cowdery might be the character that the church presents the most fairly.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I don't know if Dan Vogel is rushing to say that it was William W. Phelps who was the first person to have a recorded reference to the seer stones as the Urim and Thummim or the Teraphim.
Oh, yeah. I don't mean that he's the first. I just mean that he goes along with the usage of Urim and Thummim, at least in places, when it seems by our best historical analysis that there were no Nephite spectacles. It was always a seer stone. And the insiders early on knew that that was a treasure digging seer stone, but they wanted to present a narrative so that the listener to the story perceived in their head Nephite spectacles, when in reality, we're talking folk magic seer stone.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's it. I will just say this, folks, please like and subscribe. It means a lot to us. It helps us promote the work that we do here. We do these deep, long form conversations on Mormon history. Here we are. We've gone almost 3 hours so that you, the viewer, can have the full stuff on Oliver Cowdery, know the ins and outs, know the pros and cons, the faithful, the unfaithful, the things we should doubt, which things there's strong evidence for, and you guys get to make up your own mind. So please like and subscribe and help us promote the work here. Folks, you can also go to mormonismlive.org and donate. The time spent researching, hours and hours and hours on RFM's part, hours and hours and hours on my part. We survive on donations. We are a nonprofit 501c3. Your donations are tax deductible inside the United States. Go to mormonismlive.org, click the donate button, send us a recurring donation, $5 or $10 a month. It means so much to helping us continue to do this work. We've got the Post-Mormon cruise coming up next year. We've already sold out all 50 cabins, but Carnival has informed our travel agent that they will day by day continue to take additional cabins as part of our group. That will cut off at some point. So if you want to be part of the cruise, please do that as soon as possible. I will put that in the show notes once the show is done. Otherwise, I'm looking forward to Friday at 8 p.m. with Mormonism After Dark and hearing about your trip to Texas and whatever else is happening in Mormonism between now and then. And anything else you want to say? Otherwise, I'm ready to go home and upstairs and get some sleep.
Everybody wear your cowboy hats for Mormonism After Dark on Friday, and together we will sing the state song of Texas and the University of Texas school song.
There you go. So, folks, it's been a great night. We've loved having you along. Thank you for being part of Mormonism Live, and we'll see you Friday for Mormonism After Dark. Monday again around the horn for the newscast, and one last time we'll see you Wednesday for Mormonism Live in the next episode of that on the 10th of December. So have a great night, everybody, and talk to you soon.
Good night.